It's always so tricky. I'll likely get a notice from Eve, hopefully here shortly.
Eve may not be watching
Oh,
live.
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So we'll see. Let me do one more refresh. Okay, I believe we are streaming and recording.
Cool. All right, I call to order this November 2nd, 2023 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission. This is a special meeting. We are off our normal schedule in order to deal with some business on the agenda tonight at 6:05 p.m. In attendance, we have Planning Commissioners Carolyn Conant, Jill Tatton, myself, Kaya Marienfeld, Mikkel Layton. We have City Staff Anna Englund, Corey Shirtliff, Alexi Lamb, Michael, whose name I'm black, yes, for a minute. And then I apologize profusely. Okay, awesome. Oh, I think Anna's mic is on. Great. And we have a member of the public in form of our new local reporter here, and then our city council liaison, Luke Wojciechowski, in attendance. First item of business is citizens to be heard. We do have a public hearing this evening on the agenda, so this would be for anything that is not on the subject of that public hearing. We did receive a comment or two comments.
Two
comments, thank you. We received 2 comments regarding the Parks Master Plan, which is something we're going to be speaking on and potentially making a recommendation on later in the evening. That is not a public hearing, but as always, we're happy to consider public input on that and make it part of the record. So we'll talk about that when we get to that point in the evening. Otherwise, it doesn't appear that there's anyone here or anyone participating on Zoom to comment during citizens to be heard. So we'll move on. Next item is our approval of minutes from our October 12th meeting, our regular meeting. If folks have had a chance to check that over and see if we have any questions, additions, and entertain a motion as well.
I can make a motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission from October 12th, 2023.
Okay, great. We have a motion by Carolyn to approve the minutes. Any second?
I'll second that.
Okay, and a second by Jill. We can just do an all in favor, all opposed. All in favor of approving those minutes, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion to approve the minutes passes unanimously with all 4 commissioners present. I'm trying to annotate better so that our minutes taker can get accurate information.
It's going really as the attendance and yeah, so far so
good. Okay. Next on the agenda is item number 4.1, which is a public hearing and consideration of approval of Moab City Ordinance 2023-15, an ordinance amending the Water Efficient Landscaping Ordinance, or WELO, to resolve and remove referencing discrepancies from prior existing landscaping code locations and refine water feature wind shutoff requirements. So this is an item that we're seeing again after some changes and then things we were prepped about at our last meeting with our discussion on the wind shutoff requirements. I will open the public hearing at 6:08 p.m. If you are listening at home and you're planning on coming to the public hearing or otherwise weighing in, you will have some time. We'll keep the public hearing open for a while while we have our discussion. All right.
So at this point, we could, that we're not breaking up presentations.
Yeah.
We can hold presentation, leave the hearing open, but then allow our next item to come up.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. So there is a presentation about the updates and the things that we're considering. Corey was just saying that it might make the most sense for us to have that closer to when we as a commission might be discussing it and potentially making a vote. And I think that sounds good to just leave the public hearing open, but move on to our next action item and then return to that. Okay, leaving the public hearing open, but moving on to the next action item. which is consideration of approval of Moab City Resolution 27-2023, which is a resolution to adopt the 2023 Moab Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This is something that we received 2 email public comments about, the balance of which I would describe as being very much in support of keeping existing recreation fields, particularly Center Street ball fields, for their multi-purpose uses. Strongly encouraging us to also, the city also to build new recreation fields, as there's not enough of them in the high quality, certainly, as well as building and supporting a new indoor facility, indoor recreation facility. Let's see, let me summarize the next one as well. Yep, the other comment again was that the community needs more baseball fields, not less. That HMK being built, as nice as the new building is, it resulted in a lack of places for people, particularly kids, to practice rec sports like baseball and softball. Yes. And amphitheaters, which I also agree with. We need more music space in town. Cool. Please anyone chime in if I am misrepresenting those comments in any way, and that will all be part of the public record, because we did get some good folks weighing in via email. Oh, hi, Annie.
Yo.
Sorry, they were let into the chamber. Their cameras were just off, so it didn't pop up until the
Awesome.
camera's off. But yep, we have it. I guess we'll let them introduce themselves here in a moment. Once
Yeah.
we get to the presentation.
Annie's back. Sweet.
Yay.
Okay, we'll let you, are they presenting or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. We will go ahead and let y'all present whenever you're ready. If you would just introduce yourself and your involvement clearly, so we have that for the record as well, that'd be great.
Okay, great. So my name's Annie McVeigh, and I am the former Parks, Recreation, and Trails Director. And we wanted to thank you for having a special meeting. I know how busy you all are, but we're very excited to present the draft plan. And I also think that Brianna might be in the room with you.
Yes, and Brianna, if you actually want to come up, you're welcome to sit up at the dais to contribute any elements if you'd like.
Yes, please.
So it would be great for her to introduce herself and meet you all. And while she's walking up there, I will introduce Steve Dew. He is with Conservation Technics, and he has been the consultant on this plan and put in a great amount of time learning about Moab, and will be the main presenter tonight.
And then Brianna, yeah, if you'd love to introduce yourself really quick.
Yes, so my name is Brianna Boker. I am the new Parks, Recreation, and Trails Director. It has been great getting to know Annie and Steve, and I have been here 3 days thus far, so be patient with me. Today's day number 3, but I am popping in just as quickly as I can, and I'm happy to be here and excited to be with you guys. So thank
Awesome.
you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
We're happy to have you.
All right, well, yes, welcome, Brianna, and Steve, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Annie. And again, for the record, my name is Steve Dew with Conservation Techniques. And again, appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all tonight and for your accommodating during this special meeting. I do have a PowerPoint to walk you through kind of a little bit about the process and the product, which is the plan document that you have in front of you tonight. So let me get my screen up and bear with me for a moment. All right, so if I can just get a nod or a thumbs up or someone say that you can see this, that would be great.
We do. Yep, coming through. Thanks, Steve.
Super. All right, so get to the right screen here. Start jumping around. So for tonight, again, just want to walk you through an overview of the project, hit some highlights from the community process and what we heard from the community. Give you a quick overview of the assessment that went into the draft plan, brief review of the goals and some of the key project recommendations that are part of the draft capital plan, and then upcoming next steps. So just for everybody's benefit, the first slide here is really the what is this plan? So the Parks and Recreation Master Plan is intended to be the department's functional plan. In the realm of planning, it sits below the general plan, and it's kind of similar to a water system plan or utility system plan. It is the plan that is the strategic document and guiding document for the department for enhancing and improving all things related to parks and recreation. So parks, trails, open space, natural areas, programs, and arts. And the plan is a policy document and, again, a strategic guide for the city. It has a list of capital projects in there that represent a planning tool for staff to discuss project ideas with partners and with city council for future budgeting. The capital plan in the document is not a budget, but it is a budgeting guide. The plan itself is intended to be like a communications tool for the department to share with department stakeholders and the community what we heard throughout the whole process, what those key issues and challenges are that exist in Moab, and how this series of recommendations that are in the plan help move the city forward in meeting the community's needs. In all, it was guided by a substantial amount of public process, and I'll talk to that in a moment. Community outreach. So again, community outreach was varied and extensive. We did a lot of different things to try to hear from the community of Moab. Primarily, it was through a community survey, which was a dual mode survey. So it was a mail out survey and an online survey. So that was really a way to gauge usage, community interests, preferences, and some priorities about the types of projects, activities, and programs that the city could offer to help refine what the city provides going forward. Beyond the survey, there was also a number of tabling events where we were in the community seeking feedback. There were 2 public open house meetings, one in April and one in September, a couple different group sessions around stakeholders, and it was also communicated to the community through the website, the Engage Moab site, some social media posts just to keep the project alive during the 10 months we've been working on it. And there was also a separate technical advisory committee that helped guide and refine the plan as we moved through it. So in all, we've heard from over 900 participants in the process, probably close to 950. So just to walk you through some of what we heard, most of this, again, comes from the survey. So the survey itself had 833 responses, so a very strong response rate for a community of your size, especially. A couple key takeaways: nearly everybody who took the survey feels that parks and recreation are either essential or important to the quality of life in Moab. So 96%. Can't really get much higher than that. So something to feel good about. About 3/4 are either very or somewhat satisfied with the city's parks and open space system. So again, nice high marks there for what's provided. In terms of the types of things people are coming to the parks and open spaces for, walking, running, being on trails right there at the top, followed by relaxation or just generally being out, fitness, swimming, community events, and programming. And then you can see the list, it goes down to more specialized and more unique types of recreation, whether it's more individual or some team sports, but generally those things that people can do with ease, no cost, low cost. Those are the sorts of things that come to the top more frequently for people. Some of the reasons people aren't going to parks and open space more often is that there's a sense that there's too much crowding. There was write-in comments about van lifers and not enough restrooms or parking and the conflicts that creates, and some comments about the overall maintenance of the city's park system. So all of this is really good feedback as we started to develop the plan. In the survey, we also asked what I call a Goldilocks question, which is the porridge too hot, too cold, or just right? But in this case, it was a list of list of amenities. And the question was about, are there too many of these, not enough of these, or just the right amount? And we've sorted this chart based on the not enough column. And you can see that there's a pretty good balance overall between those who feel that there's not enough of a specific amenity or opportunity and those who feel that it's pretty well provided. Walking, biking trails, picnic areas and community events and sport courts came to the top there in terms of the types of amenities that there showed to be some latent demand for. And with the sport courts, that was often about pickleball in particular. Also from the survey, there were some amenities that we tested to see if or how well the community might be supportive of or have interest in. So again, the idea of additional walking trails came out at the top. Just to clarify the numbers in the parentheses there, it was a question about how supportive you are. And the first number in bold is you're very supportive, and the second number is the combined score of very and somewhat. So you can kind of see the general weight of the response in those two numbers. Again, overall, park renovations and trails came out at the top across multiple questions. So internal consistency with responses on the survey is always a good thing to see. In terms of some other high need amenities, more interest in shade structures for playgrounds, as well as shade for picnic areas and just shade in general, shade trees. Also interest in a splash pad that's outdoor and generally upgraded or renovated playgrounds across the city. In the realm of programming, there's stronger interest toward community events, adult classes, and youth activities and summer camps. So the survey provided a good baseline of community feedback, but as part of the process, we being my project team and my landscape architect in particular, visited all of the parks and open spaces and trails and did in the field assessments of the quality, condition, and care that exists in Moab's system today. Aside from looking at quality and condition, she was also looking for opportunities that any particular site might offer for additional amenities or enhancements above and beyond just renovating or repairing something that's in the ground today. Through that process, we ranked and rate all the amenities by park, and this matrix is just a simple way to show in a quick snapshot the takeaway from that field work. Effectively, everything was rated on a 1 to 3 scale, 1 being good, 3 being poor, and color coded. So you can get a quick glance. Green is good, red is poor. Overall, the system is in pretty good condition. And again, this aligns pretty well with what we heard from the community that, again, 75% feel that they're generally satisfied with the condition of parks and open spaces. The one area really that the city needs to pay more attention to is with regard to ADA compliance and making sure that amenities and facilities have accessible routes, have accessible features, and just provide for accommodation for people of all abilities. So through the survey, through the site assessments, and all the other public process, some core themes emerged. One is with regard to trails. Again, came out very strong in the survey, came out strong in the open houses, and it is indicative of the Moab community and your access to all of the trails up and around you. There's strong interest in additional recreation experiences. So providing for the types of amenities that the city doesn't currently offer. Upgraded playgrounds, different types of play experiences. In this particular picture, water play. Access and accessibility and equity. Again, making sure that the city's system accommodates recreation for people of all ages and all abilities. And then generally maintenance and care of the system overall. So through the community needs process of gathering the feedback and the site assessments, we worked through a review of general plan goals and plan goals from other plans to think about establishing goals and action items for this version of the plan, which then translates into establishing a set of priorities, primarily through a project list that helps or will help the city target its investments and identify improvements for the next 10 plus years. In terms of those goals and actions, I've pulled from the document just the kind of high level topic and key goal for each of the areas. And under each of these, as you saw in the document, is a series of specific action items. So it gets into more depth. So one goal is with regard to community engagement and just making sure that the plan clearly states that it's the intent of the city to make sure that the community and the public is actively engaged and involved in all things parks, recreation, and arts. Design and maintenance has to do with providing for high quality parks and trails and facilities across the city and making sure that they're cared for, managed, and maintained for the duration. Within the goal of parks and open space, it's about providing for a diversity of activities, whether they're passive or active, sport fields, or just walking through the treed trail along Mill Creek. And again, providing for different age groups, abilities, and interests. The goal of trails and connectivity is about enabling a network of trails that provide for the connectivity between parks, neighborhoods, and other amenities and public destinations through town. Some of this in this particular goal relates to the Unified Transportation Plan, as well as the need to coordinate with Public Works and the county for in right-of-way sort of connections. Recreational trails kind of live in both worlds, and it's important for the city to coordinate and collaborate to make those connections efficient. For recreation, arts, and events, the goal really is about providing for a varied and inclusive suite of opportunities year-round that engage the community through social activities and events. And then last, administration and management really is about the partnerships, collaborations, and coordination, as well as the coordination with city council and funding of the overall system. So moving into some of the key projects that are provided for in the plan draft, broke these out by topic areas, basically, just to kind of keep it clean. Within the realm of park renovations, again, the survey and our site assessments indicated the need to enhance some existing properties. So one example project is an upgrade to Swanee Park, which would include a rehabilitated skate park. We heard a fair bit during the process about the quality and condition of the skate park and its usability, as well as the need to upgrade the playground at Swanee. And while improvements can go on with Swanee, it's also good to look at options for enhancing group gathering spaces, providing for another picnic shelter, upgrading the existing ones, and the like. Within renovations is also the idea of potentially redesigning Center Street Ballpark to accommodate some more varied and more or additional recreation options, rather than relying on Swanee for being the sole big park that accommodates a lot of uses. Balancing those uses across multiple parks is kind of the tenor of this plan. Again, it would go through a public process. So having it in this plan, again, just gives guidance. It doesn't formalize what will be. For Old City Park, again, playground renovations, stage upgrade, enhancing the duck pond, and then getting into some more specifics of accommodating a splash pad, accommodating more public art throughout the city in its parks and trails. With trail system enhancements, repairing and extending the Mill Creek Parkway Trail is a key priority. And that really is the spine that cuts through the city, as you know, and enhancing that, repairing that, and extending it to make linkages and more convenient access for folks is a really important piece. That would likely require some additional easements or rights of way purchases to enable those connections. So that's part of the project list. And again, coordinating with the county and Public Works in any right of way connections. On the facility side, there is a need for the Aquatic Center to have a review done on the facility, specifically around maintenance and current architectural condition, looking at mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. This facility is not that old yet, but it is showing signs of wear. And it's important to get a professional in to take a deeper look to see the scale of those needs and help strategize for the sequencing of those improvements over time. As you would imagine, anything related to a pool is expensive. So paying attention to those core needs and planning for the timing for those will be important. Center Street Gym is an aging facility that doesn't have good ADA access, and it's undersized. The gym doesn't provide for spectator seating or viewing, and it's quite a tight space. So those considerations suggest that it's important to think about options to replace that gym, potentially with an expansion to the side of the Aquatic Center as a larger gym facility and make that a recreation and aquatic community center. That's just an idea. And because those two facility projects are quite expensive, also starting to think about the idea of a sinking fund to help finance those over time. The RAP tax is a great funding source for the city, but its revenues are limited, and it might be important to kind of hold on to some dollars over a couple of years in a row to help finance some of the bigger projects. Last couple other items here, ADA and enhancements. Again, we noted through our site assessments the need to provide for accessible routes and accessibility to specific elements within a park, whether it's picnic tables or benches or playgrounds, just enhancing that over time. And then looking lastly at some additional convenience improvements, things like shade, things like wayfinding and signage, so locals and visitors can work their way through the system in a kind of clear and cohesive manner. So the capital improvement plan that's part of the document, again, it's not intended to be a budget, but it is a guide for city staff to work with council, the departments to be strategic about how to finance and plan for projects. The current estimate in that list is about $22 million. And again, sequencing will depend on revenues and community needs going forward. So next steps, really quick, we have a scheduled session with City Council on the 14th to go over this same material. And tentative plan is to be in front of City Council for final approval in mid-December on the 12th. So with that, I will take questions or ask Annie if there's anything I missed or if you want to add anything. Or Brianna.
No, I think you did a great job, and well, excuse me, welcome any questions and comments you have.
Starting anywhere? Question?
Go for it.
Are we getting into a discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. Um, I want to ask about, you mentioned that there were community concerns about parking and van life stuff. Is there something to address that in this plan?
It is referenced in the actions and I think in the operations chapter, but it's not necessarily like a menu that you need to do A, B, and C to address those issues. It's more of pay attention to and, make appropriate measures to make sure the sites are well maintained and cared for and cleaned. It's not so much about relocating van lifers in that regard. Annie, is there anything you'd add to that?
No, I think that, yeah, like we didn't necessarily target how to deal with van lifers in the plan, but I think upgrades to Swanee, maybe kind of putting different amenities across other parks, that type of thing.
Since we're at a quick pause with that, just to speak to that a little bit, the function of this plan and as it's moving forward in that proximity will, as it's mentioned, it's been brought up with, at least within references to this plan, which will be adopted, will be utilized in other aspects other than the guiding tenets of what this plan for improvements will be. So we can reference back to this plan, say with co-compliance or other aspects of the city to say, well, part of our directive is to execute those items and reference this plan. So while it might not be like Annie and Steve are saying, there's not a mitigation plan in place here. Will actually inform maybe when we work on a code compliance plan to reference back to this parks plan. Does that make sense? How this will be used as a tool? Okay.
Yeah. Still me or anybody else have a question?
I have a quick one.
Okay.
Do you have the number of responses to the survey that you received in Spanish handy?
It was a small number. I believe it was like 4.
Thank you.
Not a bunch. Good question. Both of y'all. Yeah, I think my question is probably procedural. I think certainly the comment letters that we've got, and there's just been some concern in the community with even just proposing the idea that there might be additional recreation opportunities added to the Center Street ballparks that aren't specifically sports field or sports field sort of centered. I realize that having that in the plan just means it's something that could be considered down the road. And there's nothing saying like, oh, we're replacing baseball fields with something else. It's just saying that like we're underutilizing our space right now in a variety of ways, whether that's just upgrading and improving the sports field and like related things like the batting cages are in terrible shape and filled with goat heads, and the playground equipment in the little sort of intermediate area between the two fields is also not in great shape. The bleachers can use work, all of the things in the survey and all the things in the plan about safety improvements and handrails and lighting and all of that. I guess I just want to make sure that we're speaking to that sort of on behalf of the community who really do feel like having that primarily as it is now, at least as the focus of those fields, serves softball and baseball. It serves rec adult soccer. It serves rec kids football. It's also where the folk festival is. That's also where a bunch of sort of random community events kind of end up being in the Celtic Festival now. And it seems to, in its sort of current layout, serve all of those things. But just upgrading the current layout, I think, is certainly, what, at least as of now, the community has sort of expressed they have an interest in, rather than like, we have 4 ball fields there, so let's convert one into a different kind of recreational space. I think that sort of captures a lot of stuff. So I just want to make sure that we're sort of explaining that and giving voice to it. And it's not saying like, this is, like you said, all of these decisions will need to go through city council, they'll need to go through planning commission, they'll go through very likely a lengthy public engagement process as well. This is not like the nail in the coffin or any coffin at all, I think, for the use at those fields. So. Anyone else have comments? I'm really excited to see the awareness of how sort of woefully ADA uncompliant all of the city's facilities are, like honestly, except the building we're sitting in right now. That we've got to prioritize that. So I'm really happy that it seems like we are. And as wonderful as the Center Street gym is, that's a major problem with that particular facility. We really don't have indoor rec space other than the rec center, which is a different use, I would say, that's accessible to everyone in the community. So I'm really happy to see that recognized and sort of at the forefront of everything in the plan. Can we, and this is my unfamiliarity with any limitations on the RAP tax, do we have to, like, does the RAP TAC committee have to meet and distribute funds in various ways every year? Or can they, like you said, it makes good sense to sort of save up for a few years in order to put it towards some of these sort of major infrastructure projects we're talking about?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So for the RAP TAC, right now there's a split between the percentage that the city takes, and then for city projects, and then that's distributed to the community. And the RAP TAC is focusing on the aspects that are given out in community grants.
And that's in the allocation. That's set in stone where the allocation comes out. It's not like
it's not set in stone. It's something that can be reconsidered every year as part of the budget process.
Yeah, because I think the community grants are really cool, and the stuff that got it this year really, it seems like there was a good response to that. But I can also see if people understood that maybe like a really awesome overhaul in the Center Street gym and upgrading, the ball fields was something that was a closer goal if we just basically saved the whole pot for a couple years versus sort of splitting it in half. That could potentially be something I think people might be on board with. I think for that specific reason, if it was like, here's the dollar amount we're going for, here's what we need it for, it's going to be great. So
my understanding is that about 25% of the funds are currently allocated to, grants throughout the community. But that it can roll over, year over year, like they mentioned. So
cool.
Steve, when you were presenting, was that what we're referring to as that sinking fund? Is that what we're identifying there?
Yeah, that's how I defined it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about any collaboration that happened or conversations with the county in the development of the plan? I saw that there was maybe 1 or 2 people involved in the technical advisory committee, but it does seem like, given the emphasis on kind of expanding accessibility to community-wide walking and biking trails and seeking out additional spaces to devote to recreational activities, that some collaboration could be really helpful in achieving those.
Yeah,
goals.
the county personnel that was on the technical advisory committee were with the active transportation and trails group, Trail Mix, and then also down with the Old Spanish Trail Arena was involved as well.
And additionally, we had a trails focused discussion that also included BLM representatives. And who else was in there, Annie? And anybody else other than county?
We had county, BLM, I think the Park Service made it, and the Forest Service made it as well.
Thank you.
I have a question about, probably for Annie. Is there a formula, or how do you decide which activities get facilities and which activities don't?
Like specific activities? Well, the next,
Like like listing all the activities that we have and then how much money or how much space goes to each one? How do you decide that?
Well, after the plan is adopted, the next step is sort of picking out the projects that will be funded and implemented. And that's sort of the next step. And that will be with discussions with city leadership and staff. And then kind of looking ahead, probably on a good 10-year basis of the funds that we know are available, things that would be competitive for grants, other additional outside funding. So this is the guideline of kind of the top priorities, and then the next step will be next.
Okay.
Where is Dixie Park?
Right by Dave's Corner Market.
Mhm.
That little,
I didn't even know it was a park.
I
Yeah.
only know because I live up there.
It's got those little,
You can tell because the
Annex.
indicators of wayfinding signs were also.
yeah.
They
I
were
mean, I'm all for like a secret hidden park. We need one of those like tiniest park in the world
It is
things
the
that's like
tiniest
a,
park. It is.
wait, so is it literally just the
It's
corner?
that corner.
Little
Yeah, where the,
climbing wall.
where the,
Oh, next to the
That's it.
charter school.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay.
that little corner.
Got it, got it.
We're all
Okay.
gonna go check it out.
Oh, cool. I didn't
I-
realize that was public. I thought the charter school.
No, no, it's a
Oh.
park.
I thought the
I
same
walk
thing.
through it all.
I'm
the
gonna
time.
go do like 2 handholds.
Yeah.
Be done with the climb. Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Learned something today.
I don't know why it's named Dixie Park. I don't know, but
I don't know.
I just know that's where it's at.
Okay. Cool.
Can we ask about the splash pad situation, just because it's kind of on the same agenda as our water efficient landscaping ordinance?
Mhm.
And we're doing that update about the wind shutoff requirement because we don't want the water to go anywhere. How do splash pads fit?
Well, there are ways to use splash pads where they recirculate, so the water goes into a tank, and then you can use that to irrigate, so the water would be used twice instead of just once. So there are some ways where it's not just the one-time use, where it's flowing through the water feature and then just being dumped. So that is a consideration that we had thought about.
I did read, I Googled just a little bit, as we tend to do these days, and I read a thing from the CDC. Am I supposed to show that to the chair for verification?
No, you're good. You're
Okay.
good.
Because I was wondering, is a splash pad something that just constantly runs new water? Or is it something that recirculates? And so I did read from the CDC about that. Recirculated water is expensive to maintain. Anybody can go on the CDC and read about the illnesses linked to the splash pads and the trouble with cleaning that water and regulating that water, and the ultraviolet light systems that are sometimes required to sanitize that water. And so are splash pads really that expensive, or splash pads are not as expensive as this sounds?
Oh, well, in a previous position, and I don't know, Bree, if you have dealt with splash pads, feel free to chime in. We did have a splash pad that recirculated the water, and I would not recommend that. It was high maintenance. It was, like you said, it was pretty much treated as if a pool. So we had to chlorinate the water. There needed to be supervision. So a recommendation would be to use, there's a splash pad where the water goes into a tank, and then you can use that water to irrigate or other purposes that are not related to the splash pad, but might be needed in the park.
Yeah, I have a similar comment. You know, the splash pads that have used recirculating water are typically in conjunction with an aquatic facility.
Yeah.
That's the only way to really maintain that type of chemical balance, you know, to make sure. And then the splash pads that are separate facilities in themselves typically don't, because of those considerations.
Yeah. I will say, I think it's great that this is an option that was presented, and that, you know, it seemed to have some nice support in the community with respondents to the survey, but there are so many things existing already, I think that need work. That adding something like this, when we do have a pool facility already, we do have an outdoor pool facility, there is opportunity for water play and family activities and everything in the context of the aquatic center in the summer, that things like shade structures for the playgrounds and updating playground equipment seem to be sort of like the very high priorities of all of those things to me, rather than adding something again in a desert when we're looking at best uses of water now into the future. I think they're very cool ideas. I've been a lot of places, particularly in the Pacific Northwest, when that is something, when it gets humid outside and it feels really good. But we have, I think, shade structures over all the playgrounds should be like the number one priority as far as family time at city parks facilities is my sort of inkling.
Has there been a water use analysis done for the golf course at all?
Not that I'm familiar with. The golf course is operated outside of the city, even though we own the land through a lease.
Usually a good opportunity for some conservation methods.
Yeah. Luke, do you know that number off the top of your head? Percentage of culinary water at the city that goes to the golf course?
It's only 20%.
Yeah.
The water used in our, I think it's a little below that, but it was shockingly high.
So I just asked our city council liaison, Luke, what, percentage of water use within the city is the golf course specifically, and his guesstimate was something around 20%, but he's verifying that right now. It's high. It's a lot. It's a lot of water.
Because the city does own that land, even though it's operated by a different entity, does that leave like leverage for water conservation methods?
I would have to see what the agreement
Mhm.
was, but agreements don't last forever and can be renegotiated. So I could imagine there's certainly,
Have
Yeah.
irrigation. Surprised. 'Cause it's so large.
So that's something, if
I don't know.
the commission's interested, if we would want to file to staff kind of a formal inquiry, we could channel that up. I don't think I have the reference right now to maybe speak to it with education, but like similar to Luke, from conversations in the past, I
It's
feel like
about-
I want to wander guesses, but I think
Yeah.
maybe we'll wait.
I can't remember the total water usage in Moab, but in this article, it says that total residential use in Moab in 2020 had up to about 1,000 acre feet, and the golf course is estimated to average about 331 acre feet. So
Okay.
golf course uses about a third as much water as all of the residential properties in Moab.
So the summary from the conclusion from an article in the paper was that it was about a third of the water usage of all the residential properties in Moab is what the golf course uses.
Interesting.
It's quite a bit.
Okay, I have a question specifically about page 33, where it talks about other recreational lands. It talks about public school grounds. Can you tell me why you included that in Parks and Rec?
Yeah, so generally when we put a plan like this together, we look at the full suite of lands that might be available for some form of recreation. And those typically do include schools because of fields, courts, playgrounds, etc., and in some cases gyms. So, the city has an interlocal agreement with the school district and the recreation district for programming and other activities. So it seemed like a natural fit to at least acknowledge that school property serves some role. And beyond that, we also looked at county and federal lands on the subsequent pages.
Was the potential I can actually look for myself. I didn't see it in here. Redevelopment of the tailings pile area. I know that's something that's often sort of floated as both an outdoor event space and also potentially more recreation space and potentially actually a splash pad. I feel like I saw one iteration of future plans out there include some sort of aquatic facility, potentially. Was that something that was, and apologies if I'm missing it, but it doesn't seem like that was something that was mentioned as possibly contributing to arts and recreation space in the community in the future. That's of course farther off than a lot of these things, but maybe not so far off anymore.
Yeah, it is in there. I'm looking for the reference on my end. I don't recall if it was in the goals or in the project recommendation chapter, but it was just literally,
Yes, I found it.
it was a side note effectively of
Yeah.
pursue.
Yes, could explore what happens on tailings piles. That's on 164.
It's maybe could possibly.
Yeah.
I was wondering, and apologies if it's in there, I only got through about a third of the plan, but was there any inclusion of sort of like a rates analysis for the MRAC and the MARC, both from sort of like a feasibility of actually helping fund maintenance in the facilities, but also feasibility from an accessibility perspective for community members, like whether gym memberships and classes and things like that are affordable to people?
So the city actually did that last year. If time is not betraying me, and did decide on a new rate schedule that's going to be going into effect 2024, I believe. And that was part of that analysis that the city did, but it's a good idea to sort of like have that up front next to some of this too, potentially, just for folks to look at, I think, in the future. But there was consideration of what are the different pots to draw from, is it looking at increasing the shower fee? Because that really is kind of a primarily a tourist sort of pool of funding so that we can keep the annual family and senior membership low, stuff like that, if I'm accurately representing that.
Does that include the actual classes at the MARC, or are those like negotiated with private instructors that offer them? Because those rates always
They're
seem
all the
disproportionate.
same. I think that was
Yeah, so the study that was done was focusing just on the aquatic center.
Mhm.
We did raise our rates slightly. We did focus on some things that were more tourism based, but the result of that study was that if we were trying to recoup our actual operating costs, we would need to, I think, increase our fees like, 66%, something
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would not be palatable to the community. So that we kind of found a middle ground between keeping things affordable for the community and then trying to raise rates where we could. But I don't think it's safe to say that the aquatic center or the will ever be self-sufficient through its through fees.
And aquatic centers are not typically
Yeah.
ever.
Not normal.
Yeah, I was thinking more specifically of the classes, like different arts classes at the MARC. I think the MRAC rates are amazing.
Yeah.
And that it's amazing that they've been kept as low as they are.
A lot of that funding comes from grants, as I understand it. And so it's kind of a different pool than the rest of the budget for the other parks and recreation amenities.
Yeah, like Moab Arts kind of does its own little thing.
Right.
If
Yeah,
I could jump in really quick, in the plan, in the goals and objectives section, goal 6, it does reference the objective to periodically update fees and pay attention to program demand and the mix of programs.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to sort of reiterate again that like I'm now looking at the page where the tailings pile thing was, and so I'm seeing the Center Street Ballpark change the layout for multi-use and added uses. I think that's not something that should be a priority at this time, at least based on community feedback we've gotten. You know, I think an extremely wide array of people, everybody from like softball parents to, you know, folks who just enjoy using the field for like nighttime rec soccer. I think being concerned with any of the loss of that space, because I do think there's a lot of times when it's underutilized, but the times when all 4 fields are full of something, there's very few places where that kind of thing could happen. Anybody else have, I mean, Corey, what is our sort of action steps on this, as far as we're obviously a recommending body on this, so.
Correct. So yeah, this approach is in a resolution framework. So we'll be advancing this to city council with the resolution recommending the adoption of this plan, but it would not be specifically updating the general plan itself. It's a supplementary plan. So where we're able to move was kind of in the similar context how we had approached most resolutions, with the options for recommendation with modifications or amendments, table if necessary. I don't think that's one of the more viable. I think we want to keep this plan moving, but certainly recommendations could be passed forward, or a negative recommendation because maybe some glaring or omitted elements that we're feeling really passionate about at this level.
Great, thank you.
This might more be a question for you actually, Lexi, but phone a friend. Does the sustainability plan kind of cover recommended sustainability updates to the efficiency of municipal buildings, including recreational facilities that are also covered by this plan? Like, I'm thinking about both the water conservation angle, but also like upgrading HVAC equipment and lighting fixtures and things like that. And those kinds of things can kind of fall between the cracks when there are so many disparate plans, but does that fall more squarely under the realm of your plan?
Yeah, probably energy efficiency, not specifically with splash pad and water efficiency. That would be interesting looking at the general efficiency of buildings or water efficiency of buildings. Then, they've also received comments from me about
water efficiency of parks and outdoor spaces wouldn't necessarily be covered by your plan?
It could be, but probably not at the specific level of what would be in the first plan. But overall, with water conservation goals, we do have the city water conservation plan. Parks.
I apologize for this, but would a commission member mind reiterating or maybe briefly coming up to contribute that into the microphone? Sorry. If we're having any aspects that are be taken in consideration, we'll want it on record.
Okay. This is Alexi Lamb, our sustainability director.
It can be a short summary. Sorry, Alexi.
Yeah, the short version is that building efficiency and water efficiency of buildings would be included in the sustainability plan. The city also has a water conservation plan that does cover overall water conservation goals, and that would include buildings and landscapes. And I am also on the technical advisory committee for the parks plan and have given them comments about like landscape aspects of water use.
Thank you.
So does that, again, sorry, because I only read a third of the plan so far, but does that component come through in the recommendations for any parks that are water guzzlers?
I recall.
So that might be something interesting to.
And we are, through the new landscaping ordinance, going to be abiding by our own ordinance, which would cover
my next question.
Outdoor recreation properties, which would include some of ours. So we could talk a little bit more about the specifics of that, but essentially they'd be held to an irrigation standard, but to the specifics of maybe advancing that beyond just the limited irrigation metrics is like, oh, how let's actually try to utilize different methods wouldn't be covered under our current ordinance. That'd be something that's a little bit more proactive. Does that make sense?
And
that-
that process wouldn't need to be triggered by like pulling a permit for.
It would, yeah. So it's limited. It's limited in that way. So we're covering as much as we're covering everything else. So your point about it falling kind of between the cracks and being a little bit more ambitious would be something that we'd want to identify outside of either just static ordinance maintenance or maybe between these plans.
And if I could also jump in the goals section, objective 2.8 references incorporating sustainable development and low impact design practices into the design, planning, and rehabilitation of sites. So that is a little bit of a carryover in the conversation.
Being that most of these properties are either city owned or in some sort of conjunction that we would have stakeholder buy-in, I think that we would be able to opt into whenever a revamp of a particular property came up or we're redoing a system, we could opt to take it forward based on the goal settings here. So just because it's not perfectly stated doesn't mean that we wouldn't just make that choice at the time of moving it forward. Again, kind of referencing this plan as findings for why we're going to maybe move forward with a particular contract with an RFP or RFSQ for how to improve one of these parks properties. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
I think it is nice to have the specific accountability or kind of like the nudge for a more proactive approach in some cases. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly the will behind water conservation currently. That's pretty community wide. So.
Any other questions from commissioners or staff or comments from our wonderful presenters? All right. So this evening, we have several options as Corey went through. We can make a positive recommendation with or without modifications, or continue the action on the item, and if we need specific direction to the applicant and to staff, the applicant being, of course, the city itself, as to additional information needed, or make a negative recommendation to the city council with specifics for the reason why. And we can have more discussion or entertain a motion at any time.
I would like to make a motion that the City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation with modifications on the adoption of the 2023 Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan.
Ooh, yeah, that got missed. Parks and Recreational Master Plan. Somehow that got missed on that document.
Look, I read it right off the paper too. Do you need me to state that again?
Please.
All right, I'm gonna pencil in the right words here. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation with modifications on the adoption of the 2023 Moab Park and Recreation Master Plan.
What would your modifications be?
Specifically, or do I have to wait for a second before we discuss?
I think
you
we
could-
want to hear
yeah,
what the
hear-
modifications
All
are
right.
first. Yeah.
Specifically, I would like to remove any reference to the public school grounds from the plan itself. Would you like me to elaborate?
Sure.
Okay, I'm gonna quote directly.
It's a
from
little bit
couple-
out of
Okay,
out of turn, but I think it's important for folks to know how to second or
Yeah.
continue discussion. But we can
Okay.
continue discussion if we get a
based
second.
on feedback and concerns from not only myself, as full disclosure, I coach the junior high cheerleading team. And we use that area. But other coaches and facilities management at the high school and junior high.
And your concern is with those being considered sort of
As
part of
public
the
and open to anyone at any time, and also the tourists that pass through town coming onto campus to use the facilities. I have to have a background check and a fingerprint card in order to be on campus with children. And I don't think it should be a free-for-all where anybody could come on campus at any time. And so that's my concern, is I would like that part removed from the master plan.
I did not read that as giving that interpretation in the Parks Master Plan. Maybe we can get a second on the motion and then have some discussion about sort of what that means.
Order of things.
So I will second that motion, and we can open a discussion on the motion on the floor, which is to forward a positive recommendation with the modification of taking out references to school grounds within the master plan document. My understanding of that was that it was just, here's sort of our larger stock of the facilities and the uses and the places that like kids and community members have potentially available in the whole, like, oh, there's a rec softball team. They could potentially practice at the high school, or they could potentially practice at the Center Street ball fields. Not that was making any sort of pronouncement about all of these facilities referenced in the plan as being part of our sort of larger community rec stock were inherently available to the public. Annie or anyone, perhaps you could elaborate.
Yeah, Michael, would you like to come up?
Or Mike. Hello, Mike.
We have an open mic at the dais here. Or
Yeah.
Brianna.
I'm gonna eat my chocolate I stole from the candy
So,
basket.
Michael Black, Community Development Director. So it's pretty common that Parks master plans will include the stock at the school, simply because they are public lands and people can use them unless there are restrictions that the school district adopts, which they can. Then those parks are generally open to the public outside of those restricted times. So for instance, if you were using the field, then the presumption is that the field is reserved for the use of the school first, and second for the use of the community. But it's very typical that, especially like playgrounds at middle schools and elementary schools, that they're open to the public after hours. I don't think anything in the plan actually is preempting the school district's ability to make rules on when people can use them, and everybody has to abide by those, regardless of the plan.
Thank you for the clarification.
I can also add, Brianna Boker, that we have a specific interlocal agreement in place. I just pulled it up, actually, learning
Nice.
about it. And it's titled the Interlocal Agreement as to the provision of countywide recreation services by and among the City of Moab, the Grand County Special Services Recreation School District, and the Grand County School District. So it does give specific allowances, to allow for in-kind use of each other's properties, essentially. But, there are specific notes in place to make sure that those are utilized properly and by appropriate parties.
Mikkel, any input?
Well, without reading that document, I don't know what those specifics are, of course, but here I'll just share a concern. On a Saturday morning, we had a football game that my cheerleaders cheered at. We were in the gym to put on our uniforms, and then we walked across the parking lot past the tennis courts where the general public comes to play pickleball on Saturday mornings. And the interaction that I had, that the pickleball people engaging with my students, it made me uncomfortable. I just use it as a teachable moment that we need to focus on what we're doing and let's stay in line and go to this ball game. And so that made me text my athletic director and say, why is the general public here on campus when students, doing sports and rec, when students and sporting events are going on? Should that kind of stuff be closed off during game times, so that we don't have a mix of different kind of people interacting in that way. I've heard from several people that coach on campus that that it just being an open campus like that and used as in the same way as a public park is used is troublesome, and maybe safety concerns are there and facility usage concerns are there. So that's why I would like the reference to the school grounds to not be a part of that master plan. It just sounds like you could pull up next to the elementary school and camp out there for the weekend if you wanted to. Everybody knows that the parking lots are used that way, especially at the junior high for RVs and vans and that kind of thing. And I just would prefer that the public schools aren't included as part of the park stop. Maybe they still are because of the interagency agreement that we have, but to include them as part of the master plan, I think is not necessary.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think, part of what you're referencing unfortunately speaks more to the individual than it does the agreement or the in-kind use itself. And that is something that might need to be taken into consideration or looked at again. The in-kind agreement does allow, it says shall include but not limited to for our use of the fields, baseball and baseball tournaments, softball and softball tournaments, football, basketball, soccer, volleyball, arts and leisure activities, swimming programs, special events, races, summer camps, miscellaneous adult sports programs, and other community programs that fulfill the mission of the Moab City Recreation Department. And in kind, we provide to the school district, the city shall provide the Center Street Ballpark, the Center Street Gym, Moab City Parks, the Moab Arts and Recreation Center, the Moab Recreation and Aquatic Center, and other Moab City facilities as necessary to provide services and programs and outlined herein, provided that all other entities hereto shall have priority over non-city recreation uses. And so the school district also benefits greatly, from the Parks Department's ability to provide services. And I can tell you, the swim team is currently practicing at the MRAC right now. And so I don't know that there's necessarily a need to take out the mention of, the school district necessarily, but it does sound like it could potentially bode for a larger conversation in terms of how these facilities are being used outside of the specific
organized city programs versus just open space.
Outside of what's vaguely or generally mentioned in this current iteration of the master plan. Yeah.
Well, I know that when the city wants to use the school gyms, it's not like, hey, we're here. You do have to schedule it. And same with like vice versa.
Correct.
It's not just an open public place.
No, it's not. Those are all agreed upon.
Yeah. And like I'm housed at the preschool and it's not a public park. And we have had to deter people. I'm like, I'm sorry, we're holding school. This is not a public park. You need to leave. So, but the misnomer is that, well, it's a public school, so it's a public park. And it's, no, it's not really. So
I think this speaks to all the wayfinding signs.
Yes. So it's especially, we're open for school. You can't be here. You don't have background checks. We don't know who you are. Please leave. And so
it almost sounds like it's easier to enforce in that smaller setting than the whole high school.
I've been at the elementary and had to call the police to get people out of the facility because people are like, it's a public facility. It's like, not really. So it's not a public facility like, they think, but it is it's a gray area, like it's not really a public park. So,
Well, I
but
think it's subject
you get to use it, but you also need to follow the rules, and there are signs, no dogs, no this, but people don't follow the rules. So it's kind of one of those, it's strange. It's a difficult,
It's a challenge.
it's a
industry-wide.
challenge.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Absolutely.
I think my comment is,
further.
or sort of my input on this is I don't think that it being or not being in the parks master plan, which I think sort of considers the whole stock as far as like, I do think that's important if we're saying like we have X amount of soccer fields that like
Mhm.
the kiddos use. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's very
Right.
different. And that's
Right.
how I see it sort of in here. But it sounds like there's potentially, I don't think people that are using school facilities in a manner that is inconsistent with the interlocal agreement that the city and the school have are referencing the interlocal agreement and its specifics or the fact that it's in the parks master plan. But I do think if there is room for mention of, we say the interlocal agreement with the school district and Grand County Services, we say it should be updated periodically to address changing needs, responsibilities, and expectations. That's in the parks master plan. And I think potentially, I don't think it would hurt at all to have a quick little sentence or two preamble in all of the site specific discussions of school district properties throughout the parks plan, to just have a reference saying, by the way, there's an interlocal agreement which makes these functionally public in certain ways at certain times, subject to that interlocal agreement, like the specifics. I don't think that hurts to have in there. I think that's an extra flag potentially, that there are restrictions, that it's not just like, and there are in the parks too. You're not supposed to be at Rotary Park on the swing set past a certain time of night, or in the pavilion if someone has reserved the pavilion for a birthday party. I think people should sort of be on notice that it's not just a free for all. And I think, honestly, I think that's a convenient excuse for people who are going to behave poorly anyways. But I do think it could be potentially, I don't see a downside to sort of explaining that out a little bit more and just saying like, these are in here because of this, which I think we have, but then also saying they are subject to different requirements and different rules because they are Grand County School District property. Whereas like, for example, if they're being utilized by the school district in any way, they are inherently not public for that time period. Would that be something you'd be willing to amend to include, or in your motion on the table right now? Would that sort of address your concerns and the concerns of the other folks that you're sort of talking to about this?
Help a lot.
Cool.
Yeah. Mhm.
Is that a
Pretty big amendment.
possibility, I should say?
So, this specific piece says it mentions that there is an oversight committee. It says an oversight committee comprised of the city manager, the school district superintendent, and the chair of the recreation district board shall administer this agreement. The Parks, Recreation, and Trails director, the Grand County administrator, and the Spanish Trail arena manager shall act in an advisory capacity to the oversight committee. And the oversight committee will review this agreement on a recurring 3-year basis and coordinate budgetary and other matters regarding this agreement among the governing bodies of the city, the recreation district, and the school district. So there is a certain piece in there that does mention at least on an every 3-year basis. And I know there have been regular amendments made to this document. So might be up for discussion about reducing that timeline somewhat so that we review it, more frequently. But that is absolutely something that's already stated to a degree. I'd be happy to discuss further outside of the Parks Master Plan.
Could we maybe forward a positive recommendation and make a request from staff to sort of analyze what bolstering that a little bit would look like before presenting it to city council?
Through staff, it would be, I think, a continuation of Brianna, Annie, and Steve. So maybe we'll let them answer what the capacity of that opportunity might be.
Are we talking about, potential changes or to the interlocal agreement or still bolstering the master plan specifically with?
I think all we can control is what the master plan says in reference to the interlocal agreement, not the interlocal agreement itself. Nor do I want to wade into that territory. But,
That is-
oh,
that is a lot.
Michael, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it might suffice just to say, like you're saying, kind of a preamble, nothing in this document supersedes the ability of the school district to manage their properties in a way that they see fit. Obviously, they can make rules. Obviously, they have to make rules because they have to protect children.
Yeah.
And then also, nothing in this document would presume to supersede the agreements, whatever agreements are in place at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this agreement covers non-organized play or if it's just for organized.
It's organized.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and I think we're talking more about unorganized, where people are showing up at certain times. And I think the school district, if they feel like their facilities are being used inappropriately, they have every right, just like we have every right to make rules at all on our properties. They have every right to make rules on their properties that they see
It's
fit.
heavily being looked at right now.
Yeah. So maybe that would,
Pickleballers, get your stuff together,
Yeah.
guys. These darn pickleball. I'm just kidding.
It's a
And
lot
this
of
is
the-
a joke. That was a big joke.
You're
Got a
gonna
lot
get
of
all
pickleballers
vampires
after
now.
I don't want the pickleball people after me.
Additionally comment to Michael's point in that is that maybe these facilities are in some capacity being used even appropriately and unscheduled.
Yeah.
But it was the individual thing that was Michael pointed out is the individual aspects of that situation really reflect how any situation could have unraveled, where the enforcement capacity is really what could have lended itself to curing that.
Mhm.
But that speaks back to those properties designing their enforcement programs themselves and then the city lending to that, which I think we have PD capacity and agreements to do so.
Great.
So it's baked in there, but I think it could be, like you say, bolstered through a preamble here that's
Yeah.
just reflected through in that way. That makes sense.
It looks like we've had some
Just really
Yes,
quickly.
I will invite you up.
I think also just outside of the master plan itself, it wouldn't hurt to potentially reach out as a concerned citizen to council and to the school board so that when these interagency agreements are potentially renegotiated, that's something that council can direct staff to make sure that is accounted for.
Great. Thank you, Luke.
So-
Trying to think, we haven't had a
We have a motion on the floor.
we haven't had a
with
motion and an
second.
amendment in a while.
We can do
And-
the hard thing with the amendment, or we can vote on this and it not pass, and we can make a new motion,
That sounds good.
which staff
That'd be a little
would be-
cleaner. That'd be cleaner.
would be
Yes,
cleaner.
I'd
That's the thing,
appreciate
yep,
that.
that was where my brain was going.
Yep.
Thank you
Absolutely.
for laying it out for me.
Yes.
Okay, that said, any more discussion on this particular motion before we take a vote? Okay, motion on the floor, maybe we'll go through one by one,
Sure. Yeah.
just for,
Let me
Is
make
it
sure
good?
I have the motions correct. Okay, I believe I do. All right, Carolyn,
Nay.
Jill,
Nay.
Mikkel,
nay.
Kyan.
nay.
Motion does not pass.
All right, motion fails. I might attempt to make this new motion. Let me think for a second.
Don't say the housing,
Thank you.
don't
'Cause
read it
I
off the
would've.
paper.
For anyone confused, there was a slight copy
Apologize.
paste typo in our staff summary, which is fine, and we don't expect them to draft it from
And
a blank
I
Word
thought that
document
was
every
fixed
time.
on I'll double check. Yeah, I apologize for that. That was fixed somewhere, but not everywhere apparently.
I get it. I don't think I've written something from a blank page in decades at this point, so. Okay, I will move that the City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council on the adoption of the Moab Parks and Recreation Master Plan with the modification that a preamble is added about the applicability of existing interlocal agreements that would supersede anything in the parks master plan in reference to property that is not city-owned property including Grand County School District property. Does that cover it? Okay. That is my motion.
I would like to second that one.
Okay, second from Mikkel. Any further discussion? Thank you, Michael, and everyone for chiming in with your expertise. Okay, I think we're ready to vote.
With that, before we do, I want to check with staff on this. Annie and Brianna, do you think with that particular motion, we have what we have need to generate that language? Was that direct and clear enough?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Then if we're ready, we'll do a roll call vote for this
Great.
one. Kaya, we had your motion and Mikkel a second. Thank you. Carolyn?
Aye.
Jill?
Aye.
Mikkel?
Aye.
Kaya?
Aye. All right,
Motion passes.
motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Brianna. Thanks, Michael, for your input and good questions from everyone. That's a really good note, and thank you for bringing that to.
It's a beautiful motion.
Thank you.
Thanks for cleaning
Oh,
up.
I've been here long enough. Should be able to do it by now. I would have said housing plan though, so thank you for that.
Leave it up to me. I will figure out how to.
Okay, awesome. I think now we still have an open public hearing on
Mhm.
consideration of amending the water efficient landscaping ordinance. This may be a good time to hop back to that, I think.
Thank you. So we'll say special thanks to Annie and Steve for chiming
you,
in on
guys.
Zoom, and we'll let you guys go. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brianna.
All right, so we have returned to the public hearing. We have not had any other citizens come into the chambers, nor have I received, let me double check, any other comments submitted since then. Nope, not that we would necessarily have them on record anyway, but let me just confirm. We have not. So we can close the public hearing at this point if you wish and move on to discussion presentation.
All right, I will close the public hearing on item 4.1 at 7:32 p.m. On to our discussion of what we're considering for approval this evening on the same item.
All right, for discussion, Anna has a brief presentation to, I think, walk us through the kind of breakdown of changes. They're minute. We do have proposed language that is slightly different than what was the commission's recommendation. We will talk through that, and if we need to have additional discussion about why, we can certainly dive into
Miles
that.
is here, we cannot do that without him.
That's
so-
right. That's right. And he did such a great job at framing.
Oh my
the
gosh,
motion, so
yes.
We'll give a little tribute to him for that motion originally. But thank you, Anna. Go
For
ahead.
Miles.
Okay, so, this is
So-
just, a-
Your mic. Sorry.
this is just a continuation from our discussion from October 12th, just, to refresh our memories. We were talking about the sections of the ordinances that are gonna be affected by, this new ordinance that, we're proposing to have a recommendation from you. This is just the list of the different ordinance or sections. And basically what we're doing is removing the sections of the language that refer to the old landscaping ordinance and replacing it with the new landscaping ordinance section. And then the second part with that would also be to clarify the water feature section of our new ordinance. And speaking with upper administration, they recommended that we put in as the water feature that has a shut off valve it's just going to be for the height. So the recommended language would be water features with a cumulative water-free fall greater than 4 feet shall install a wind shut-off sensor. And that just clarifies and simplifies. So that was the recommendation. And so does anybody have any other comments on this as we're looking at it?
I think that pretty well encapsulates the crux of the discussion that we had. Know more about waterfalls than I ever did. I feel like there's a TLC song about that, but awesome. Thanks for putting that together.
No problem. And so this is just the recommended motion, and that was in our agenda summary.
Great. Is that that's the only thing for this?
Yeah, that we
Wow.
could speak to a little bit more specifically that within that you
I'm
might
fine.
be familiar with this. Yeah, there was a pre-final draft that had many of these clarification where we were striking out, but within the final draft, and I don't know if this was really quite clearly intentional, but we were requested to have a clean draft, but those clean drafts require also to have red lines. So there was confusion where our code processing said, oh, it wasn't technically in a strike format. So we're just going back and fixing a lot of those. We try to usually catch those within the first go round, obviously, but fixing that, and then obviously the one little tagline within water feature, that's all we were directed to do.
Great. We can entertain a motion then. I made my great motion. I don't want to ruin it.
Okay, I'll
Choose
do
one.
it. I'll make the motion then. I move that City of Moab Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council on Moab City Ordinance 2023-15, an ordinance amending the text of Moab Municipal Code to resolve and remove referencing discrepancies from prior existing landscaping code locations and refine water feature wind shut-off requirements.
Very nice. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, a motion by Jill and a second from Carolyn. Any discussion? All right. Corey, whenever you are ready, we will have you walk us through a roll call vote again.
All right.
I can't even remember pre-pandemic times. We didn't do roll call votes then?
No.
It's a good practice though.
And the council does use them interchangeably between maybe more contested items, but an all in favor suffices for usually most items. But with this one, we'll go ahead and do a roll call anyway. Mikkel.
Aye.
Kaya.
Aye.
Carolyn.
Aye.
And Jill.
Aye.
Great. Motion passes. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Lexi, everyone involved in that. All right, next item, discussion item 6.1, which is a workshop on Moab's outdoor lighting ordinance update, which is an ordinance amending the approved Moab City Ordinance 2019-03. Gosh, that was 2019. Wow. To include additional regulations required through the International Dark Sky Association certification and resolve outstanding discrepancies within the existing regulations.
All right. So as this,
May I request that we take like a 2-minute break?
Sure. I think, and this might be something we'll work on a little bit more formally. How do we? I think with council they've broken into this how to recess formally.
Oh.
But I think that's if the body's accepting of that.
Normally I just sneak away, but I actually want to listen to everything.
Yeah.
So,
So I think if the body's comfortable with that, we don't have to make, I think at this point, any formal motions as our bylaws don't reflect that.
Great.
Right?
we're gonna take a quick little break and we'll be right back.
Perfect.
Mics are on. Don't say anything dumb.
Good disclosures.
Just me. All right.
I really thought people were gonna bring tons of leftover Halloween candy today.
Treatment
For your colleagues or for your fellow commissioners? Or you're sparing our team? It's really sad. I know. I tried putting lemon twigs basket this year and they all got taken. Sure. Parents gone. Following their instincts. Yeah.
This week has been a week.
We can reconvene if you're ready. I
All
think
right,
Anna's
yes, let's
stepped
do it.
away, but for sake of time, we'll go ahead and just
Great.
jump in. Oh, as Anna's here's back. we're
Your
all-
dress, Anna.
we're all here. So within this workshop format, we do have kind of the open dialogue opportunity, both in a briefing style and then contribution style. My hope is that you've had time to walk through what were multiple of the exhibits showing different angles on this approach. One of the exhibits is identifying amendments coordinated with kind of the loose working group of those that were original drafters and authors and what some of their original thoughts. It didn't necessarily reflect all the elements that were housed within that 2022 draft red line. And my hope was to have a third copy, which was a consolidation or compromise between the both of those. Many comments were made independently of each other that could have been incorporated both in both ways. And then some were language and provision sections that conflicted or had kind of discrepancies with each other. So that's where the third copy would really have been handy. Unfortunately, because of the formatting between the multiple documents, I was having a really hard time consolidating those. So I essentially had to go back and rewrite it myself, which is time consuming, and I'm still engaged in that process. But what I do have, and I think what I'd like to do, and this isn't as convenient, but just share that working document and we can work through that. So your familiarity with at least many of the provisions there or contributions you'd like to make, we can just work through, have you submit those contributions and I'll work them into the draft kind of in a note format. I won't do it formally here, just maybe as a comment. And then by the time I'm bringing this back to you, well, next week, very quick, it'll be polished in a pre-final format. Additional discussions that staff and this working group had, and this is maybe I'll share and then we'll go over the overview with this. Typically with these ordinance development reviews, I like to do a telescopic breakdown, meaning here's the whole ordinance and here's really what we're going for. And then here's by section, really what's happening. And then a summary of each section. And then we actually get into the raw language. We're just jumping straight to the raw language. So if there's anything that you're like, wait, I don't understand how this scopes in or where this lands, we can take a moment, pause and come back to that. But I think just getting right to the point will be really helpful for tonight. So the auto format we're going to see is really more formatted towards the base copy, which was from the working group. And then what I've been doing is incorporating aspects from the 2022 plan, as well as what have been the compromises or what have been clarifications between these two groups of how we're practically going to be able to function, what aspects we're really wanting to use, and then some compromises that are being removed from both. So this title and intent purpose section is added. It wasn't in the previous draft, so this is in our 1703 intent, or what was title, intent, and procedures section, and then it says purpose within the subsection. And it's really just to include that light, trespassing, glare are things that we're wanting to regulate. So a really simple addition there, really not too much of a stretch. But then kind of reframing what is the scope and applicability section into that general provision. So more, and this what we're framing this as is would have been very similar to our landscaping ordinance as a standalone chapter. But what we're actually doing, given this was already an approved ordinance with an approved framework, we're updating that framework that lives within our supplementary requirements. That might not mean a lot to you guys, but basically it doesn't have its own home. And as a part of the general code rewrite that we're going to do, we'll likely move it over and give it its own home at that time versus trying to pull it out of this existing section and then
Some
place
sad joke about like even our code sections are homeless.
it. They drift, and it from the more technical aspect, it at one point made a lot of sense to have one place where when there are not planners helping coordinate these sections, it's hard to keep track. So the idea was, can we just have one section that has all the regulations?
Yeah.
But then you just have, it's like a run-on sentence. It's
Mhm.
kind of what it becomes. And it's almost more technically challenging. But so our little homeless codes,
No.
and what is kind of being self-titled now, MOLO, really deserves its own chapter. But within this title and purpose,
Can the travel council use that next?
MOLO,
Hashtag MOLO.
MOLO.
What was it? For a while, the hotel with the slide on the north end of town had like YOLO on their
Oh,
sign
that's
for
right.
like,
Oh, they did.
That's right.
it like popped up during the pandemic and I was like, timing.
Unfortunate.
But-
So working our way through these, many of the comments were maintained so because this Word document, we usually produce in a PDF, but again, like we were trying to work these through, we would lose a good amount of material just because the auto formatting would accept red lines and delete a lot of this. So it's going to look a little messy, but the mayor, Kaylin, and myself have been making comments on this item. Kaylin and the mayor have not had an opportunity to make comments on those that I've just submitted. So you're seeing in the dark blue or maybe even black on this screen as it shows up on the monitor. But within the scope section, why it's relevant is it's kind of giving a precursor to some of these major aspects. One being essentially what we're going to kind of loosely term as nuisance lighting, or of our multiple punches. We have 1, 2, 3 punches. That's our first punch, which is nuisance lighting, something that we're going to be handling immediately through a violation aspect because it is truly meeting the terms of trespass or obtrusive lighting. The second is the legal non-conforming aspects of our code, which we're going to shift into a more dominant, active legal non-conforming precedent versus just nuisance or just waiting to an immediate termination. But then the third is the kind of the compromise of maintaining the amortization deadline, but pushing that deadline out. The understanding is that we can push that out. With the compromise isn't 10 years from this time, but 10 years from the time of original adoption, which would be 6 years from now. 10 years is kind of the typical time frame within the criteria. So it's a little bit of a compromise. For IDA, we could have put 10 years from this point of adoption, but this kind of stays more to the nature of, hey, we really do care about this and we want to push this forward. But the hope here is that the first 2 punches will take care of a majority of what is going to be the really challenging properties and challenging lighting that we have. And the third could be kind of the end goal benchmark that maybe encourages folks to come to compliance because they know there's no waiting this out necessarily. However, I will disclose that that could be something addressed by the planning commission and city council at that particular date of amortization, whether they're at a capability point, whether it's code enforcement capacity of staff, or where the community is at in general to engage in that amortization. So I don't want it to be a false promise that people come into compliance and then we move those goal lines again, and they're like, "Why? Wait a minute, I spent all this money and you just moved this goal line." However, because this is the true intent, is to bring our community into as much compliance as possible, having that as a tool, but then disclosing this tool is going to be reviewed at that later date. So anyway, that's framing what is the bigger, I think, compromises that we're working with as we've gone through this. And then this is, again, redlining a lot of the outdated existing material with what is kind of improved new material. Additionally, well, so we're going to also move some of these around. So the exemption section is currently housed ahead of definitions. We'll move definitions up, just kind of set that stage. But since it's here, exemptions are some of the territory we probably want to get some direction on tonight. We've updated what it's not shown here as new language, but the emergency and safety lighting to be exempt is updated. And this is really surrounded around kind of what we'll call critical lighting or emergency based, hence the name. I don't think there's any complications with the planning commission here. I do know, because we're such a small community, we've had similar discussions to this with zoning. Maybe it's appropriate to the zone, say a hospital helipad. The hospital helipad's lit. Well, that all makes sense when we're looking at it telescopically or just that one setting. But say that helipad is actually immediately adjacent to a residential zone. Now all of a sudden we have this conflict. People say these lights are ridiculous. And that's because the use itself makes sense within our context, but maybe in its adjacency, because our community is so tight, we don't have maybe like the University of Utah, where their hospital campus is enormous and also set into a whole campus setting where residents have an opportunity to be buffered. There is not really a true sense of buffering in our community. We're all really in here together. So that is the only reason why I'm highlighting this now, is to be feeling confident in allowing that the health and safety is going to kind of take precedent over the adjacency or neighbors kind of being uncomfortable with what the use is next door if it's a legitimate use. So that's something we will have to grapple with the community, but hopefully they understand if you move next to a hospital, you're going to hear a helicopter come in, you're going to see the lights come on. And then temporary outdoor lighting, this actually got noted, and it's very apt as we move into this season, is it was maintained. It was kind of more or less accepted by the other group. They weren't jazzed about it. But I think if we're okay with the idea of essentially the October season of lighting, which is an expansion of what was only one particular season, which was the traditional holiday season around
Heck
December.
yeah, you should see my house.
And so the added language from the other group, from what we had, which is just exempt, it was just permitted by right, is may remain on until 10 p.m. They may remain on. So it's kind of the way the wording is here, is he was trying to maintain both wording sections. So it could be, I think, Smith a little bit better, but is lighting could remain on all night if it's not objectionable. I'm so sorry. Let me check this call really quick.
Yeah, that's some squishy wording if I've ever heard. Okay.
Nuisance.
Yeah.
What about the 4th of July people?
Oh man.
And the Valentine's Day people.
They're
And
Valentine's
the
Day people.
St. Patrick's Day lights. Oh, yeah.
January 15th, that's like proactive. You know, Christmas is done, get them down. I feel like I don't take anything down until like March.
Sorry about that.
They're up as long as they're not on. Or as long as they're not nuisancing.
That's true.
I think we're on to this point. Did we cover it? Are we good?
Yeah,
Should I go back?
Keep
What
going.
Okay.
objectionable
Is if it's considered nuisance glare. So if, say, you have strobe lights on for
yeah.
maybe a particular pagan holiday,
everyone
you
not do that anymore? Can I get that on the record?
so it gives us a little bit more teeth. So I think that was a nice addition that was made. Okay, we're good with that. Special events, this was added as well. This is something I think we need to talk to administration about, in that our reach, while this would make the most sense, the review capacity and our ability to actually enforce and implement it, it gets really challenging with special events, particularly as special events are going from very big, broad things into a bunch of little minor things now. So that's almost something we're going to see a lot of things tonight that is either we want to regulate it and regulate it all the way or not at all, but mitigating in the middle becomes really, really challenging. That could be something that would be similar to that. But maintaining the language for now, because it's possible, it's enforceable, it's legal. So any comments there? That's a little bit more administrative than it is, I think, at the commission level for community, but I'm sure many people in the community would love for more regulation with special events, but it speaks to, again, the nature of a special event. Our job is land use. There is no land use associated with special event. You're a temporary situation. So you don't have any rights as far as land use go necessarily. And that's what we want to keep our ordinance focused around. If anything, we can move something like that into our event code, but not within our land use code. Does that make sense? Even saying that, walking that through, I think that gives me clarity to talk to admin. Pathway, and this is something you'll see between these two ordinances, is the language proposed by the group was still wanting to use exempt lighting, fully shielded exemption lighting governing through lumens. This is something the staff and the group kind of communicate back and forth. We didn't get to a super solid landing, but I think I'm going to fight to say, again, I'd rather just not regulate it at all, or regulate it or prohibit that. But regulating into the minutia of particular wattages of solar, it gets to the place where it's unfeasible for us. So you'll see here the purple language, maybe pathway lights less than 18 inches are exempt, just meaning if it's not emitting a light directly up into the sky, but it can have a horizontal throw, if it's lower than that, would be acceptable regardless. And this still has less than 300 lumens per bulb, but that basically governs it to a really low level feature within the calc. But what the other option did was remove it from exempt items and just push it into this. You can have whatever exempt items you want, but then we have to do this mixed calculation matrix. So I'm going for a little bit more of the prescriptive route versus the budget route. I really like this simile that we've got now that landscaping's in. So are we okay with that idea? Okay. This is something was added back in the temporary lighting in the same context, and we can talk about that a little bit later when we get into a bistro lighting discussion. We could move this into exempt from fully shielded if we remove the calc aspect where it's prescriptive, just prescriptive in a different area. Okay, so no issues with exemptions yet. Okay. Down into the definition amendments, bug rating, there's really nothing crazy there. Now, direct illumination, this is the big one. This is what I was hoping to spend most of our time with tonight. We're trying to move through this quickly, but I'll read this aloud. This will be the first time you're seeing this actual language. This is one of the compromise sections. We went from direct illumination in one draft, which was the original, to directed, meaning there was kind of this application of intent, back to direct. So direct is the term we're using now, but it has a consolidated meaning. So direct illumination means the area of intentional illumination emitting from a fixture generally formulated by shielding depth, illumination width, distance and angle of illumination field respective to the height and location of illumination source and context of the property grade. So that's the formula right there. But we're not actually framing it as a definitive formula, because that actually could create tripping hazards for us later, but becomes this is the repeatable and general context in which this light will be reviewed, but we're not actually committed to running a formula of all these variables on every light. So it creates the same effect, but gives us a little bit more flexibility and broadly applying this in the true intent of what it was meant to do. It goes on to say the illumination pattern is typically represented by a high intensity cone of light 10% or greater emitting and expanding outward from the illumination source. This area is in contrast to the area outside of the high intensity cone, separately defined as light spill. Two things here. We can work on essentially what is that high intensity cone of illumination. That's very, I think, easily observed. And in fact, really fun experiment, because why not? I have a number of images, and I'm sorry for everyone at home that's not going to directly see this, but you basically, I'll walk you through the experiment. Take your phone, turn on your light feature or grab a flashlight and hold that flashlight up next to a wall. So I'll do that. Everyone can see that decently enough. So with that, you can see obviously there's a high intensity cone going directly down and a slightly less intense cone going out. But then there's almost kind of this non-existent area that's between the horizontal plane and what we're seeing as the illumination source. That is the spill area. So that is to say, hopefully everyone could hear that, but I'll go really quick. Is you'll look when you shine that light next to a wall, it basically creates a light throw or cuts that cone of illumination into a 2D illustratable option. You know what? I have it right here. Will everyone humor me?
Yeah.
I have a diagram prepared. We'll go ahead and just use it.
Whiteboard.
I know. So I've upgraded from the whiteboard a bit, because this is if you watched any of our previous discussions on this, I had illustrations on the whiteboard. Not many people can see, but in the meantime, did really research this to death and became kind of a nut about how lighting actually performs and the science behind it. But let's grab one. So it's not perfect, but this is kind of what your experiment on the wall might show, which immediately replicates sconces or other types of illumination sources as they're perceived on properties. So what we're seeing, this is a totally, except for the uplighting, obviously, if we were to take this aspect away, not because this is clearly uplighting, but just focusing on the bottom half of this feature, this would be more or less a compliant dark sky IDA certified feature. The illumination source is it's recessed into this feature a little bit, but it obviously has a lens there at the bottom. And then through that, you can see that field of throw. Right through the center, you're going to see kind of from this point to this point, that higher intensity area. And then you'll see a slightly lower intensity area between here and that dark space. And this area is still what we're considering that high intensity cone illumination area. It's just less so because of the math that is going on within this fixture. So all of these are variables, just given the schematics and the particular fixture itself. But you're seeing all this dark area. And this is probably a photo that's during the daytime or sometime where you're not seeing all the light, but clearly a diminished illumination here. But if I were, a property neighbor, you follow my cursor over to the left-hand screen, I'm a property neighbor over here, and maybe we'll say this is the property line right at the edge of the frame. If I'm a property owner, I can still see that illumination source. I can see the lens if that's above my observation plane. So the perception that light is actually throwing on your property is there. You're seeing light, but where the illumination, the foot candles are actually being thrown, don't really even touch you. So this whole area, what would be from the horizontal plane down to this wedge, would be considered the spill area. So light that is there, but it's in such a low intensity that's not actually doing anything, but it is indeed observable. And this is what, again, the crux of this entire issue revolves around is, are we protecting dark skies or are we protecting dark ground? But even within dark ground, what does that even mean? If we don't want any perception of any light at all, that's a very different conversation. So if we want to have, by the title, scope, and purpose, safe, secure, and functioning systems, meaning our home streets and circulations, you need light to be thrown, and particularly on the ground. So it's not we're diminishing light or removing light, it's we're using light very intentionally. So that is the direct illumination definition. And so within this feature to the right, that formula that I described about, as you read it, just the shielding depth, the illumination width, the distance, the angle, all these variable factors, that basically creates where that light cone ends up on the ground. So if we have a particular property in a general sense, we're going to apply that to make sure that directed cone is not trespassing into your neighbor's lot, but that neighbor might see the illumination source. That's not the same thing. So if we can drive home that point, that's the biggest factor, because the whole first punch, that most aggressive aspect that we wanted to implement, which is nuisance lighting, is not, I don't want to be able to see any lighting on my neighbors. That's not what we're protecting. But if your neighbor has a cone of illumination that is directed at you, that is a trespass. That's nuisance. It's, is not dissimilar than somebody blowing smoke onto your property. It's traveling across. But anyway, enough said. I think, did we get the point? Gosh, I sure drove it home.
I feel educated.
Okay. It was funny that a lot of this was all going down during the eclipse, and it turns out the physics of the eclipse is really similar of the umbra and penumbra and how light. So I was like, this is either a massive coincidence or I better get my prep bag ready. a little too close home. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on if we're okay with that. Fully shielded fixtures. This is just additional language, as it's in the original ordinance defined kind of redundantly in a multiple of places, that it actually ends up eating at itself. So Kaylin worked to sort through some of these requirements and kind of consolidate them in that way. Light trespass, this was slightly amended. Again, under the same context, that light trespass means direct illumination falling over the property lines that illuminates other grounds or buildings, period. Keeping that very simple, because the language that you reviewed had in an objectionable manner, which creates a whole squishy language issue for us. And then the previous definition, because basically meant if you can see the bulb, it was in violation, which is also not physically possible. So we've resolved both those issues. It is something that we're now removing partially shielded fixtures. It was almost defined by reference, but we prohibited them, so there's no sense. It's either shielded or it's not. And so Kaylin just thought it was more apt to remove that altogether. Safety lighting, this is something we can consider here a little bit. It sounds a little bit more official than really what it is. Safety lighting it means any lighting required by the building official or zoning administrator for the purposes of safety. That could be the engineer for things such as including egress, ingress, pathways, circulations, or et cetera. We'll refine this language out a little bit more. But what I'm wanting to maybe do is, this gets into the context of when we're talking about lumen counts or top, maximum lumen for property, is that if it's safety lighting, you can't just keep throwing safety lighting and have it all exempt. So we're going to fix that later on. But for this purpose, maybe defining safety lighting as, the required but minimum requirement of lighting by official factors or reviewing agencies. So that is to say, if you had an egress and it requires that egress to be illuminated, it has to have one light. That doesn't mean you get to put 3 to 5 lights around that egress and say, oh, it's all for safety. That's you're going over and beyond. You just need the one. That's all that you're going to get your your carrot credit for. We'll talk about the carrots and cookies a little later as well.
Is there an advantage to have it that it says required by the building official or zoning administrator instead of referencing like plans or
International Building Code or something?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This more simple answer to that is that a lot of those regulation documents be it we say, oh, the adopted 2021 IRC requirements for the building code is they are constantly in amendment. They're constantly changing, constantly renewing, sometimes disagree with themselves. And so basing our code on other people's code is something we really try to stay away from unless the state requires us to tie it. Because every time they may make amendments, even amendments we disagree with, now we're having to go back into our code and figure out how to fix it. So that's was the intent behind, we're going to have the regulator be the conduit for whatever the rule books that's being applied, but it gives them kind of the discretional authority, which is how most of those rule books work. So the building official has interpretive authority of his rule book within his jurisdiction. So the book isn't the authority, he is actually when it comes down to actual reviews. So it keeps it a little bit more to the subjective point of review versus objective that can be brought in kind of actually what's the word, incorrect. Is that comfortable enough? A lot of this, anytime there's interpretation, the major fear is let's not have interpretation at all. Let's make it as clean, as repeatable as possible. The problem with that can be is there are some areas within this ordinance, especially the gray area, we're trying to really find that fine point, but it never really exists. It's just that continual common denominator remainder that you can't divide any further. The closer you get to that point, it moves further again. And so just basing that off of an authority is actually a little bit easier in these cases.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. Spill light, again, this is changing what was previously non-directed illumination, and we didn't really have, we had the trespass language in the definitions prior, but spill light or light spill means the area of illumination emitting from a light source outside of the direct illumination area. That's a pretty underwhelming definition given the context of direct illumination, but I didn't want to overdo it in a way that the more language we have, the more area there is for discrepancies or loopholes. So if it's a yin and a yang, there is area that is this, and then the area that is not that is this. So they are codependent areas. You can't have one without the other. Temporary lighting means lighting that plugs into an outlet is not hardwired. Now this factors into a discussion about bistro lighting. We might as well jump off this bridge. No, let's work down to it. I changed my mind. Thanks for being flexible. So within this section, it was mostly consistent with what you saw in your draft, on the newer draft. There are not many amendments I've made through here. A lot of this is cleaning up language. This is into the exemptions of fully shielded light, fully shielded fixture requirements is where we're having that discussion of prescriptive versus budget, if that makes sense. So I've actually gone ahead and I put a strike through this language, which was proposed, which is to say individual unshielded fixtures with no more than so many lumens are permitted. I'd rather just say if it's not fully shielded, it's prohibited. There's no reason except for very specific occasions. One, I've maintained this. I'm not particularly fond of it either, is spotlights, because I feel this is considered one of the most common complaint lights that we get. So if we're creating an avenue for people to have these and to be misused, then it becomes a compliance use issue. Is it being used the way it is intended to be used within this ordinance? It's not necessary. I don't think we need to have it. Just ensure that the directed illumination isn't leaving the property. That should be good enough.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, you're going to need more lighting, but using it in different capacities versus one source trying to capture a huge area.
I would say almost all the nuisance lighting I've heard of
is kind of
consistently
geared towards this. Yeah.
So
This was something that was maintained and I think added on by Kaylin. I'd rather just remove it altogether, but it again speaks to this bigger discussion of what does the commission want as far as budget, being a little bit more flexible with the budget. It gives you more creativity with lighting. My reason for not recommending this is our not enforceability, our processability of that.
Yeah.
It's really challenging, but if it's something that we are really valuing the flexibility and creativity, which is one of the statements and purposes, we can work with that. It's just, again, an area I could see us wanting to come back and revise in the future.
Buy a 3D printer and just like 3D print little shields for everybody's
You
existing
could,
lighting.
but the building official might come after you because they might light on fire.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother
Different materials.
kettle of fish.
Not necessarily, you know,
Even
composite
even
plastic.
cans, metal. Surprisingly, everyone's like, "Oh, we'll just do metal." It's actually that's a heat conductor and actually creates more problems. So, light being also a heat element.
Silicone shields for all.
That's right. So back to 3D printing. So within this section, we have the language. I'd like to get direction if we pursue a little bit more of the budget or pursue a little bit more of the limiting prescriptive option. The additional options for prescription would be lighting for federal and state flags. This is a year ago. I think this was one of Jill's first meetings. we discussed this. So that would be permitted. And then possibly moving bistro lights down to this section. Now let's have the bistro light discussion. This is if we're familiar with the sign code amendment that we processed in 2022, feather signs, or they're go under a number of names, but if you drive through town and you see a flexible spine post with a flag type feather banner that says usually one word type of advertising, those are not permitted. We remove those from the permitted sign code, except for in very particular instances like food trucks or under advertised little businesses. But it was the same argument where I do not want to regulate these. We either permit them in total or we prohibit them entirely. Regulating them becomes far too onerous, both for the applicants and for staff. So this is something with bistro lights. Kalen and the mayor, they want to allow them, but they're really worried about people abusing that power. But again, I think you need to make the call of this is purely an aesthetic, community-driven thing, and if that's what we want to do, that we should just allow them. We do have conditions on them. Obviously, they have to be off by 10 p.m. unless they're associated with a particular aspect of the business. So that's all has been worked through in the 2022 draft. But generally speaking, I keep every time we have this discussion, I want to bring it up. Is this what we want? So I'd like some feedback from the commission now on yes, bistro lights with conditions of illumination, mostly timing and location, or no bistro lights at all.
I love bistro lights. I think they're great.
Okay. Consensus?
I like the bistro lights. I like the bistro lights. I would like to go on the record.
I understand the concern,
Yeah.
but I think the general timing illumination standards that are present in what is being looked at already, I think that covers it.
Okay.
No bistro lights is setting up a world of nonsense, honestly, with enforcement.
I mean, it'll be easy to enforce, hard to maintain, because that's the problem with temporary lights is people just plug them back in.
Yeah.
Or put up new ones left and right.
Or these are decorative. I don't plug them
But
in.
they're really easy to find. We'll put them that way. So,
but I don't think the point of
It's
this
a-
code is to like easily.
Yeah, like turning them off. I mean,
Yep.
I like my yard dark at night.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Corey, do you think that, like, does allowing bistro lights with that consideration of turning off after X PM or whatever, does that seem overly burdensome from a, like, staff regulatory capacity perspective?
Sure. So let's run the scenario really quick. We're closed at City Hall. Somebody has their bistro and they're like, it's 10:30 or 11. The bistro lights are still on. They file a complaint, but it's the next day the bistro lights are off or it's daytime. It was an individual instance. With code compliance, we've and this is something maybe I'll share with you guys. We've been really working with the code enforcement team and compliance, which are really kind of two prongs to the overall compliance group that we have. code enforcement's kind of the active, we have active enforcement now. They're out there observing, helping, coordinating. So that's something that within that, we've developed multiple tracks of a compliance process. It's formalized through policy. It's not some pretty firm standard, but basically, if there's a verified, you took a picture of it, it's verified, it indeed happened, and we can verify it that it did happen. We can essentially issue warning and notice of violation far quicker, which is coupled with instances of fine. So for every instance that there's a picture of your yard being illuminated past this time that can be verified, you can have or levied the maximum zoning violation, which could be up to $650 per occurrence. So somebody conceivably could buy their way out of that for a certain amount of violation, but over time, if that becomes an issue, you can actually exceed to a advanced step where we're prosecuting you now. You've moved beyond compliance. You're a habitual violator, and within that nuisance category, that we're now prosecuting you for that. And one of the mitigations is like you've lost your permission to have bistro lighting because you can't seem to follow the ordinance. That would be how we handle it right now. As far as you talked, how onerous is this? I think was the original question. I think the point of this story of what this scenario might look like is that we have now the structure to support something like that. So I don't think it would be too dissimilar from weeds, how we have had to handle weeds in this last year, which was a really big weed growth year. So it was a lot of enforcement. I think we had over at one time on a particular with our compliance team, these reports, and over 72 properties we were dealing with weeds and new abatement to those. So it might be something similar to that where it takes a lot of time, but hopefully we can carve through that and get some traction. So no, I don't think it's too onerous, or we don't have in a place we don't have capacity, because there are areas where like we don't have capacity for that. This instance, I think we would be okay, depending on how many people, feel so they want to violate it. That could always change, but does that capture the question? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm also inclined to be in favor of the bistro lights, but I was just wondering if that sentiment was going against the statement that you made kind of upfront about preferring to have it more black and white if possible to reduce the administrative burden. Totally.
This is something as well that as we move into this ordinance enforcement period, which would be as soon as this is approved, the inaction period will commence. We have the 1-2 punch, which is immediate effect. If it becomes either too burdensome or we realize that the effects of this ordinance are not something the community wants, there's an outcry, this is too onerous, or hey, this isn't going far enough, we need more regulation, we can always come back to amend it further. This is kind of our initial grab at this particular item. So this is kind of, I think like Stephen said earlier, our Goldilocks element is trying to be as permissive we can without violating the true tenets of this ordinance, but it is light, so. Okay, any other comments on bistro? I think I have good sense of where we're at.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your patience on this. So we'll try to wrap it up here shortly. Total light output. This was a section of the 2022 language that was not incorporated with the updates from the working group, which was below that. You can see all the red lines. This is something that was not incorporated because at this point we had not made the amendments to put a threshold on the exemption for that, what we'll call the carrot lighting. So this is the cookies and carrots discussion, meaning really quickly, carrots it's the lighting that you need to have and is required. Cookies is aesthetic lighting, stuff that is just to benefit the property, but is not actually serving an intentional purpose other than aesthetics. This current language basically says there's no cap. What we would do is install a cap and allow for the carrots to exceed that cap. But if that cap is, if we do exceed that cap of the property, there can be no additional aesthetics or cookie lighting, no non-safety lighting. And then if a particular plan is over budget for lumens, and 80% of that is safety lighting. They would have to reduce down all of their additional lighting to 20% to meet their threshold cap. Does that make sense? So we're going to accommodate all the safety lighting that is required. So we're not creating a push and pull with other agencies, but we will not allow any additional lighting beyond that. So you're not getting to kind of double down on those things. With that clarified, the other working groups was satisfied with that. They felt good. We did not amend the threshold lumen counts per property. Lumen counts in general are pretty tricky because lumens fluctuate depending on who's producing the material. But we actually found it's a little bit of a guess, you know, to how illuminated and in what ways is a property illuminated can be. Who knows? So far we found that it's a pretty reasonable approach. We found some properties that the safety lighting is like, oh, we need to go above and beyond, but other ones were like, oh, you've met your lumen calc or under budget, and it's a nicely coordinated property. So we're going to leave those in place for at least a moment. But in a similar way, if we find in the future, we'll come back to commission saying, hey, staff's recognizing this over and over again, we got to change this cap. That could be something we always amend later on. The lighting hours, this was a little bit jumbled within this versus our original draft. And so I don't have my incorporation of things like commercial properties versus businesses was amendment that Kaylin had made. I'd prefer to keep it within the language context that's going to support, I think, compliance a little bit easier, because businesses, well, it could be a property with a commercial zone that is operating something maybe not qualifying as a business, maybe like a nonprofit per se, and they would all of a sudden not get the same accommodations as a standard business license or something like that. If that makes sense. So I was going to bring that. I think the nature and intent is the same though. We don't have any considerations on color, do we? Although Kaylin did want to reduce it down to 27K. That is something that is a little ambitious given this industry standard still at 3. But we found that 3 is still pretty bright white. I mean, the intensity of light versus temperature are two different things, and a lot of people perceive intensity as the color, and we found that with our street light program. So I almost recommend we maintain the 3000K and make sure it's an amber 3000K versus a.
I feel like that's more important than it being the white lights.
Yeah. Okay.
I remember that being the biggest issue with this sort of tester lights that
went in.
Yeah, this was an item that we deleted. Kaylin didn't delete it, was wanting to find a little bit more about that. Essentially, it comes down to our obligation to approval. If we approve something, it goes through the plan approval, and then it goes through the construction set, and then it goes through actual construction as approved. First of all, again, if we're using our methodology correctly, we get this kind of confused all the time. Don't you have to go out and look at the light? I'm like, no, the math is the math, a 2D paper rendering, and I can tell that all from a computer what is or more or less compliant within the standards that are appropriate. If we're going out on site, it's getting into a much more subjective, in my opinion, or my particular observation of something. So that's something I'd like to remove, is that post installation nighttime inspection, because if we were to say, oh, no, it doesn't qualify, it's like, well, I did exactly what you approved me to do. There are communities that are engaged in legal situations because of these types of thresholds. Now to the big one, amortization. Maintaining that, I think, again, this is where I'd like to get some direction from the commission on. I think I framed it earlier. I don't think I need to review it again, but what our thoughts are on maintaining amortization versus letting the 1-2 punch do its job, or letting the 1-2 punch work, and then that third punch being down the line. So this is kind of getting into the one punch. I can scroll back up. But again, moving that period out 6 years from the effective date of what would hopefully be the approval this winter. What was that?
I think it's a good compromise.
Okay. I think staff is willing to work with that timeframe. I think I've made my kind of professional analysis on this, and I think we're all aware of the processing perspective that I have. But I think there is certainly a community and political will to this ordinance that can be identified, and this is how that is being shown, is through this aspect of the ordinance. My biggest disclosure to this is that we really do not want to be moving the goal line on people, that they feel we keep changing the rules to either benefit ourselves or others, that if we were going to do something, we're just going to stick to it. But I think if we can give people that 6 years, and I think it's very important at that 6 years to be like, hey, we're very clearly, we are not going to do this. But I think having people engage into that, like where we actually start issuing violations for immediate termination, and then because it becomes challenging or too onerous or too much, that we pull out, all those people that have spent money will have spent money while others have not had to do that. And that's not equitable. So that's my stance on it. And I think allowing it to maintain is tiptoeing that direction, but I don't feel uncomfortable enough to allow it to extend at this point. Knee-jerk reactions. Well, I do want to move on, but I do want to get kind of a more or less thumbs up, thumbs down. General. Okay. I think I'm getting a sense that we're all
This is such
accepting
a,
of,
like,
accepting of the situation.
The council like has to 100% agree
Mhm.
on this.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll send something and then.
Yeah. And this is where I think the commission, it'd be nice to have a strong voice from the commission. If we
Yeah.
want to say, okay, we're willing to be on board with this, I think that's acceptable. But I think however you'd like to frame your voice in this, it's important. Either, yes, we're behind you. Hey, we're okay with this, but we see problems, or no, we're objecting to this. But picking one of those three lanes with voice would be really helpful.
I'm just trying to think of like, if some of the examples I'm thinking of in my brain of things that are particularly sort of like onerous,
Mhm.
non-dark sky lighting are also a light trespass, essentially.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've tried to communicate is that
Yeah.
1-2 punch is going to take care of a lot of when people
Yeah.
think to an obvious, like, oh, well, what about this? I'm like, 1 or 2 of this punch
Yeah.
will likely take care of that. Most of the things that will be handled at amortization is lumen calc, or the lumen totals, lumen calcs, and temperatures. Because at that point, it'll have filtered through this basically fully shielded aspect.
Yeah.
That will have been handled.
Yep.
But will it, we're going to have you engage in updating all of your lighting, whether it's LED or not, in a temperature upgrade or taking out lighting to meet your lumen count.
Mm-hmm.
Without you updating the property, without you initiating it. We're going to come in and tell you it's time that you're going to do this. And that's what can be either, I think Carolyn had really good comments in the previous conversation of the two ends of the spectrum. I think there's a massive majority of means capable people in the middle. But then there's, I think, certainly a number of properties that are on the lower end that are not capable. They are getting by with what their budgets are currently. So asking for them to add this additional cost could be pretty onerous. Or on the other end, people that have more than enough means, but it's such an improvement that it's going to be, well, I'm right. It's a lot cheaper to fight you than it is to just do the improvement. So we'll see that option surface as well. But again, this can be an opportunity to let the 1-2 punch work its way through the community for a number of years before we have to really make a firm decision. But I think, like Kai saying, whenever we do that, council has to be aware of what it's doing. It has to be a good partner to the community, and that's kind of that partnership is what I think we're kind of hearing right now around jurisdictions and communities, is that the entity needs to be a good partner, a good participant. It can't kind of play the whole, well, we'll just get what we can, and then if it falls apart, falls apart. That's not good stewardship of your jurisdiction.
I think it's the best we can do. I feel like it's that, I know you want sort of strong.
That's okay.
But I think it's a tough situation. It's kind of odd. We're
Totally.
inherently not going to capture everything. But I think overall compliance and not just sort of throwing hands up and being like, oh, nope. I should say property owners, not just throwing your hands up and being like, oh no, I think is something that's important. And then it's just going to kind of have to come down to redevelopment, essentially, with a lot of the major sort of not fenders, but like particularly, the outside fixtures that are like up and down on the side of the hotels. Like those just drive me nuts.
Again, that's a 1 punch. So handled. Consider it handled in 2024, which is pretty cool. I think we're really, so we haven't gotten to 1 punch yet. Why don't we do that really fast? I think I've gotten a general sense about amortization. The 1 punch is non-conforming fixtures must be brought into compliance if they violate Moab Municipal Code, special provisions, all of these sections as determined by the zoning administrator. Again, that's an interpretive element, but we're going to be using the same methodology that's predictable and repeatable within that direct illumination definition. And these are words I want to change, but they get to, these are kind of like legal words. So it's like saying variance. I don't want to use them, but it does get to the nature of what this is the abatement of the nuisance shall be attempted through non-costly means, such as redirection and relamping, meaning it's not handling lumens, it's not handling temperature, it's just getting it from being a nuisance. And if that can't be done, new fixture shall be required if the nuisance can't be abated or it's just extinguished. Take the bulb out or just disable the fixture. So that's any uplighting, any of those things that you see from the street. You're like, man, what is going on there? That's usually going to get captured in this really pretty neat option. So we'll scroll down here to, this was additional language Kaylin put in. This is kind of, again, getting back to that budget element of, for a small development, you can have this kind of multiple aspect of lumens. But anyway, I think like I said, we were going to come back to that. I think the redefinition of direct illumination takes care of a lot of this last language, but this is what Kaylin took his whack at actually listing what would be a formulation. The fixture is designated installed such that no more than 20% of its light is emitted above the 30-degree plane measured from the vertically downward, and no more than 5% of it, the light is above 60. So the 30 is basically your direct illumination, and your 60, or that 5%, is spill. But I think what we've done is we've removed the particular parameters, because any given subjectivity of where that light's placed and all the things we've discussed could change that. So we would have a functionally totally approved fixture that totally throws into somebody's lot, or a fixture that really wouldn't throw light, but because it doesn't somehow meet these parameters, we would have to prohibit that. So it unties our hands from being caught into painted into a corner. But this section regarding special illumination, well, I should mention quickly signs before we get to special provisions. Is an update for the dark sky IDA certification. They updated some of their sign language, so we're just incorporating that the way that they've requested. But this direct illumination down in special provisions will be added everywhere. This is our first punch, so to speak. So that's not unlike the existing conditions we have for noise, smoke, vibrations, dust, anything that could be considered nuisance-like. And the reason I want to use nuisance or abatement is that's a whole nother section of code, I believe in Title 8. So, but that's the essence of what we're getting at. Okay, that is the update. Thank you for bearing with me. We're a little bit 10 minutes past what my goal time on this was. One additional direction that would be really helpful is a little bit better guidance on the prescriptive versus budget option. We could pursue either. It's framed perfectly by the landscape ordinance. More creativity, more flexibility, but would create a little bit more challenge both in review, but also a consistent application. People will say, well, why did they get to that and I can't do that? So, well, they went through this process and they so happened through their property got to this yield. Maybe your yield's different. And with that freedom and flexibility comes a little bit of more complexity of in all ways.
I'm distracted reading Caitlin and Joette's comments.
I know. And I began to resolve a couple of those because it really was kind of framed as a kind of a conversation, not
Well,
so much
yeah.
like a red line content.
Well, no,
but
I
then I
like
was
it.
like, some of it is important to understand.
Well, Kaylin is always so incredibly thoughtful about things that I genuinely am interested in what he has to say about it. So,
which is fun to have Joette's like, well, I love it.
I
It's
know.
like-
The contrast.
Agreed.
Yeah. At one part, it was like, well, what about my poor choice?
yes,
I love that
right.
so
Which is good.
much.
We'll all obviously call in our own situations.
For sure. I was like,
to
oh yeah,
reference.
my old house had one of those
Totally.
too.
Totally.
So funny. I mean, I'm incredibly impressed with how this is shaped up.
I am too.
Yeah.
And this is with the AEH. I was just saying this recently. Anytime that we seem to get a lot of pressure around a particular ordinance, it really does seem to yield a kind of diamond effect of the
Yeah.
more pressure is applied, usually the more bulletproof and more truly effective that ordinance becomes. So this has certainly felt a lot of pressure, and it will continue to feel a lot of pressure.
Cool.
But I feel it's getting to a place where I think we're finally starting to see the ground level out for all concerned parties.
Well, I know we all think we're special, and we are special, but I think Moab is actually pretty unique in the dark sky context as far as so many factors compared to other towns that have gone through this certification process. And it's either really small and really easy because like everything is tourism based and everything is that, and that's so the priority over everything else. Or you have a lot more just sort of less wealth disparity in the community where it doesn't really matter if you're sort of requiring people to just fix a whole bunch of stuff in their house.
Mhm.
So, and we're not either of those things.
Mhm.
So it's interesting. Awesome. Future agenda items?
Well, I'd like to get a comment on budget or prescription,
Oh.
leaning one way or another. Just a hint of where you'd like to see that. Obviously, I can even prepare both. That's possible. I'd prefer to do again a consolidated ordinance, but if we'd like to see how that shapes out either way, it's possible. But yeah, direction on how we as a commission, when we see site plans coming before you, you'd like that material presented, so that you're ensuring it is, when we show you the matrix, here, we did this evaluation, we believe it meets the standards. How are you going to review our review and ensure that it's capable and enforcing the intent and scope of what this is? That's the budget prescriptive. That's the question is of how do we see our ordinance best being installed? These are both good options.
Carolyn, do you have any thoughts?
I'm still a little unclear what you mean between budget versus prescriptive.
Yeah, so it's maybe a good example for this is bistro lights. Maybe that's an easy, tangible one for all of us. Is bistro lights, we're kind of categorizing as this temporary exempt under conditions. It's kind of a static thing. If you do these things, you're allowed to do it. The original ordinance framework unfortunately had some circular regulations where the fully shielding exemptions actually kind of circle back on themselves. So you could be exempt from fully shielded fixtures if they're fully shielded. And you're like, okay, wait a minute. So the criteria actually created problems there. So we could fix that, and so you could have you could have, it's really similar to landscaping. So what we did with the pool, like you can have a turf, but you're putting all your energy in that turf. So you can have 100% unshielded lighting, a spotlight on the garage. But if that's where you're going to put all your unshielded lumen sourcing, you can do that. It's 100% legal under a budgetary item versus saying we want to regulate all these different types of items. And that's where originally what happened is they were saying, well, we'll let you have free lighting, unshielded, bistro lights, pathway lights, whatever you want. And then they started kind of figuring out, wait a minute, we don't actually want that. And it has to be directed down if it's this thing, or, oh, it has to be under a certain level. And so they worked through the criteria where it was acceptable, and they found their only acceptable criteria was compliant lighting in the first place. So that's where, again, getting into this budgetary option, I see we could make it work, but you're kind of setting yourself up for some weird stuff where say we hated bistro lighting. We were going to say no bistro lighting, but then we approved that level of budgetary. We could see people doing bistro lights, and people why do they get to be, well, they chose to use their unshielded budget towards that, unless we start putting a bunch of parameters on the budget process, which kind of defeats the purpose of the creativity.
I don't think that.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
The more you look at it, the more complicated it becomes, which is why I'm wanting to move away from it. But
I think clarity and expectation, both for staff and for the public, is really helpful, even if there's like a couple pain points.
Yeah.
Honestly, where it's just like, oh, I wish I could have this one specific form of lighting, and there is still administrative discretion to some extent at the end of the day that's left.
That did remind me of
So,
something. Thank you.
and I think there's important exemptions that are in there, exemptions with criteria, which makes more sense than
Right. So it's to say
the budget just seems
overall
weird.
bad lighting is not allowed.
Yeah.
But we'll accept these few credit bistro light. We're willing to concede these under these regulations versus saying, well, you figure it out whatever you want. And if it's under an output, maybe the sky perception would be correct, but the local perception would be pretty challenging. So that's why I think from Kalen and that scientific perspective, it made sense, because you're only emitting a certain amount. The perception of how that is on the ground is actually worth
The
flipping the
enforceability
argument.
of that is like bananas too.
That did bring up, you brought something up, but I'm so sorry I missed it. I was going to come back to this. Is we have this particular section here from the original context. An applicant requesting approval for lighting that does not conform with these standards shall follow the procedures, findings, requirements set forth in this chapter, which means a variance. They can request a variance. So we'll leave this in, but this is a good question. We've built this into the rest of our ordinances, which I really do like, which is an exception process through the land use authority, likely you, maybe the council, to say if there's some really, we don't know what the situation would be, but where lighting that doesn't comply with this, whether it's lumen, whether it's temperature or directional shielding, they can say, look, here's the context why this is important. And you can be the determining factor on that based on criteria. I really do like plugging that in, because it's I always break down on this verbiage of a backup procedural step for us. There's not one determination. We kind of give those consecutive abilities to come into compliance, which really helps us with applicants, where it's not a hard line in the sand. It's we want to get you as close to compliance as possible. And if there's a really good reason, there's a flex zone where we don't have to tell people, we don't have to prohibit things that we want permitted, and we don't permit things that we want prohibited. So
Yeah, I think it
we've been
helps you
saying that.
achieve that flexibility and creativity without causing like the potential for mass chaos.
And maybe that's what the budgetary item, that's what we're getting at, creativity and flexibility, right? But then it's on a very regulated scale and subjective.
Yeah.
It's not a conditional use. We're not going down conditional patterning, but it is through an exception process, gives us a little bit, just a little flex versus being just so firm in a code that is so broad. So that's something
The budget approach.
I
very
just thought about that.
confusing, personally.
Say that again?
I found the budget approach very confusing personally.
Just from a site approval perspective. Budget. That would be just thinking about laying over the site plans and having to do all those calculations about everything all the time.
We're seeing this in landscaping as well. Say you did go that budgetary route, and all of a sudden you want to change one of those elements of the plan. Do you have to come back to plan commission and redo your whole lighting study for some of these things? And the answer for landscaping is yeah, you would in most cases. So it would again fall into that context of process. Somebody's like, I'm just changing out a little walkway light. Well, you're changing your schematic of your lumen layout. So for your unshielded, so we'd have to make sure that complies. So we're thinking we're maybe moving a little bit more towards prescriptive with the addition of maybe adding an exception condition in there with criteria.
Yeah.
So, okay. Okay.
There should always be that exception.
It's becoming more of a
Be
common
arrogant
practice.
to think that we've thought of every possible,
Sure.
thing that could come up. So.
Okay. Well, if that really helps. Sorry, I know that was about 15 minutes of extra work for us, but that really does help frame out something nice that I think I'll produce a single draft for our public hearing in line with the recommendations tonight, as well as those incorporations from the working group that I feel really does the job. Thank you. And thanks for being willing to watch my wall demonstration. And then for everyone at home that participated with the image online.
Example visual.
You might get
I think that's the end of my, what was that?
You might get a picture in the paper.
Oh gosh, yeah.
I was gonna say,
Yeah, I
it's
should have
way
done
more
it in a
exciting
more-
than like, me and Mikkel
I should have been a big
making
mag light.
thoughtful faces the whole night. Ask Doug. I've been on his case.
I do
about
want
the
to check,
pictures he's put on the
Bryce,
paper.
if you're still with us, or Anna, if from staff, there's any other elements.
still
that-
here. Yeah.
Thanks, Bryce.
Way to hang in
That
there.
anything else worthwhile on this particular topic?
Nothing I saw.
I think maybe we want to discuss, maybe we should discuss a little bit more about the way we would do an exception process for the lighting, like we do other things such as a reduction in parking or the landscaping and things like that. I think maybe we should add a additional or section for exceptions for this, if that's what we want to.
That's something we'll add a new subsection
Yeah.
that is an exceptions process, and it will mirror our landscaping exception. I think I was really happy with the way
Are you
that
calling
actually
it exception or are you calling it variant?
exception, very deliberately an exception, which allows for the variance option. We'll keep that because the variance is still a different but important option. I think
Variances are a lot harder and have a lot higher standard for people to meet than an exception.
it honestly, the variance, what I can think of a few properties where a variance would actually probably apply if the exception didn't. Specifically Sunset Grill and a couple other people that have such a dramatic landscape application to their lighting, that maybe their directional lighting when you're up next to it, you're like, this would, if it were on a normal horizontal place, make total sense, and they are going to have a really hard time in coming to compliance with really anything. So if an exception process doesn't work for them, I could see them applying for a variance, but also a couple other properties that might go through the same, where it's not just us, it's an ALJ third party, which would be really good to have. Because like Anna's saying, if your geology doesn't allow you to comply with this ordinance, even if you want to, that's what the intent is. But that would be mostly for safety lighting that we're requiring them to have, that yet we can still be seen from down below. That's where a variance would likely meet that criteria. But thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, it'll be a separate subsection frame similar to the landscaping ordinance.
And
Okay.
they'll have additional standards under what circumstances those would be allowed. and
Yeah.
Type of thing as well.
Any parting comments from poor Alexi? Didn't contribute.
He always contributes, Corey.
Alexi, I want to give kind of the full floor to you at this point, kind of apart from the planning staff being kind of a sustainability item. I think we're sharing definitely ownership of not just the ordinance, but the review. Alexi has been.
You're sharing ownership of Alexi.
Yes, we share.
Between
we
departments.
do. But Alexi is conducting dark sky reviews on our plans currently. So I think her work has highlighted some of the areas where it's really problematic and where we're struggling, and also areas where it's like, I think this is something we can maintain. So
Yeah, well, I think for the most part, you were very thorough. Going with the more prescriptive as opposed to budgetary approach, I think makes sense from like a review. It makes it a little easier than trying to get them to track down and tell you, you're like, do you have 8 of these fixtures and how many lumens are they again? And then the lighting studies that they do provide actually are incredibly helpful, and we use those a lot for light trespass. But that's only at a higher level of review. Not every plan is required to have that. Otherwise, I think that this really does cover a lot of the issues that we've had with it, and it gets rid of some of the circular or the references to other sections. And you're like, how could someone end up in a situation where they have a non-compliant light that is compliant based on it's fully shielded because we started with them being partially shielded. So I think it takes care of a lot of those circular places where we were kind of jumping around in the code, and we're like, I don't understand a situation in which all of these parameters could be met.
okay. Well, thank you. I really was trying to make that quite quick, but as we're rapidly accelerating this towards city council approval, I wanted to make sure whatever you're presenting, you had good bearing when we present it to you next time, and we can really focus maybe more hopefully on the public comments coming in rather than our own initial reviews. So we'll do some outreach. I think I'll work with Alexi, not just to get our standard noticing out for this, but really bolster some good contributions to the public, hopefully, to make sure they're aware of it, because this is a huge buy-in from the community to want to move this forward. And this is their platform. It's a planning commission meeting, public hearing. By the time it's at city council, contributions by written statement can be accepted as testimony, but there may not be an opportunity for you to speak on it. So come speak on November 9th, next Thursday, at the public hearing for this. And then from there, we'll see how it goes with city council's agenda. All right. Future agenda items?
Oh,
man.
planning commission.
So on that note, future agenda items for next Thursday. Thank you for the special meeting, which wound up, it was just gonna be Parks Recreational Master Plans. We built it up with a couple more items. Next meeting, we will be holding the public hearing on the MOLO, outdoor lighting ordinance. Ordinance 2023-14.
Hashtag first.
Hashtag
That could be
MOLO.
the campaign, the rollout, like
Hashtag MOLO.
you only need to light once or something like that.
We'll workshop that. In addition, Alexi will be back with us for another item, presenting the Sustainability Action Plan recommendation. It's similar to how we advanced the resolution for the parks this evening. And then an additional public hearing, and this is something I had a little bit of opportunity to reach out to the Plan Commission about. I still need to reach out to the Housing Task Force. Is we're going to be having the Moab Area Affordable Housing Plan coming back to Planning Commission for a public hearing opportunity, and essentially our research and how we want to cure all scenarios to make sure that the general plan is truly updated as an Appendix A. This gives us that opportunity. So I doubt that our contributions and our statements and our support of that will change, but it does give the community an opportunity to speak a little bit about it before we update the general plan with that as a true appendix. Back to sustainability action plan. Any highlights or trailers, teasers for the plan?
We are
presentation
on an
next week?
accelerated schedule, so you're not going to get a full plan, but we're going to give you everything that we have so far. Basically because there's a push to try to get it to come before this council, which puts their last meeting the second week in December. Other than that, we have vision, we have goals, and then we're going to have the top 6 strategies and a full register of all the strategies that will be in the plan. And yeah, we'll have all that to you.
Beyond that, we, I think, may have some traditional planning action items coming forward. We kind of
Wow.
had this big series of city initiatives, but our November 9th meeting is set. I think we've got a lot to handle, so we won't be adding any additional items to that. So our next meeting would be December 14th. We don't currently have anything scheduled for that meeting, and we will not be meeting on December 28th. We'll follow in suit with City Council and the one meeting in December, most likely, unless something urgent coordinating with council comes up. So that is our future.
Excellent.
Man, time.
Thanks for all of your work. That was a lot of
Future's
work.
so bright, you have to use shades.
Still
Still
Hashtag
workshopping. You have to downshade. You
Hashtag
go
Mola.
forever. This is what my brain does when it's tired.
Marketing department.
Oh God. All right. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Yet another long but productive meeting. Thanks. Thanks so much. All right, we're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.